In the heart of a forgotten rail yard, shrouded in the soft haze of early morning mist, the Fable engine rested like a relic from a bygone era. Its polished wooden carriages gleamed faintly beneath cobweb-thin veils of dew, brass fittings catching the first pale light that crept over the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rusted iron, mingling with an indefinable something older, a whispered promise woven into the very timbers of the antique train. Evelyn Hart paused at the edge of the platform, her breath visible in the cool dawn air. She was a woman in her mid-40s, with dark hair streaked silver like threads of moonlight, and eyes that held the quiet weight of years spent wrestling with memories. Her gaze traced the ornate carvings that adorned the train's exterior, swirling vines, mythical beasts, and delicate filigree that seemed to pulse faintly with a life of their own. The Fable engine was no ordinary locomotive. It was a vessel suspended between worlds, a place where time folded in on itself, and stories came alive. Around her, the rail yard was still and silent, save for the soft footfalls of other passengers arriving. Each moved with a subdued urgency, faces etched with shadows of regret and longing. None spoke much. Words seemed inadequate to the weight they carried. Evelyn observed them with a detached empathy, as if she could see the invisible threads of pain that bound them all. From the shadows near the engine, a figure emerged. The conductor was an ageless man, his vintage uniform impeccably tailored, the deep navy fabric contrasting sharply with the gleaming brass buttons that caught the light. His eyes were the most striking, feature-shifting and smoky, as though reflecting flickering flames trapped within. He moved with deliberate grace, a silent sentinel overseeing this congregation of souls. His gaze settled on Evelyn briefly, a faint, enigmatic smile curving the edges of his lips. Without a word, he gestured toward the open doors of the first carriage, inviting the passengers to step inside. The sound of the train's ancient whistle echoed softly across the yard, a sound both mournful and strangely comforting, as if calling to something deep within each traveller's heart. Evelyn stepped forward, the worn leather of her boots clicking against the weathered platform stones. She carried a small, battered journal, its pages filled with hurried notes and reflections, a silent testament to the stories she had yet to tell and the regrets she hoped to confront. The train's interior welcomed her with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of lavender, the flickering gas lamps casting warm, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and contract with a life of their own. Seats lined the polished carriages, each facing inward as if to encourage conversation, confession, or perhaps silent communion. Evelyn found a window seat and settled in, her fingers tracing the grain of the wooden armrest as outside the rail yard began to dissolve into mist. The other passengers took their places as well, their faces illuminated by the soft glow within the carriage. Among them, a man with tousled blonde hair and a restless air entered quietly, his sharp jawline tense with concealed turmoil. Evelyn watched as the conductor moved down the aisle, his presence both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder that this was no ordinary journey. As the train's wheels began to turn, the sound was at once mechanical and musical, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to echo the beating of hearts burdened with unspoken sorrows. The landscape outside blurred, the familiar dissolving into the surreal. Time bent and shifted. Moments stretched and folded back upon themselves. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of her past pressing gently against the edges of her consciousness. The Fable engine was not merely a train. It was a vessel of transformation, a bridge between what was and what might have been. Here, regrets were not just memories, but living stories waiting to be told. The conductor's voice finally broke the silence, low and resonant, weaving through the carriage like smoke. Welcome, travelers, to the journey beyond the roads not taken. Here, you will confront the echoes of your past choices, the shadows of your regrets. But beware, the stories you uncover may change you in ways you cannot yet imagine. A ripple of unease passed through the passengers, mingling with a fragile thread of hope. Evelyn opened her journal, pen poised to capture whatever truths awaited on this enigmatic voyage. The train gathered speed, hurtling toward the unknown, leaving the forgotten rail yard and the world as it was behind. Outside, the mist thickened, swallowing the tracks ahead as the Fable engine sped into the realms of memory and possibility. Inside, the passengers sat in quiet anticipation, each ready, willing or not, to face the stories their regrets had conjured. And so began the journey through the winding corridors of what might have been, a voyage into the heart of human longing and the transformative power of storytelling itself. The whistle sounded again, a long, haunting note that lingered in the air, beckoning the travelers onward. Evelyn's eyes met the window, where shadows flickered and shifted, a prelude to the tales yet to unfold. The train's rhythmic clatter was both a heartbeat and a countdown. What awaited beyond the next bend? What truths would the journey reveal? The Fable engine stood in the fading light of the forgotten rail yard, its antique carriages bathed in a wash of twilight shadows and the faint scent of rust and oil. The air was thick with a palpable stillness, as if the train itself were holding its breath in anticipation. One by one, the passengers approached, their footsteps echoing softly against the cracked concrete, each carrying the invisible weight of their past choices and silent regrets. Evelyn Hart was among the first to step aboard. Her movements were deliberate, almost reverent, as she crossed the threshold into the dimly lit interior of the train. The familiar creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet stirred a strange comfort, mingling with the faint aroma of aged leather and varnished mahogany. Clutching a worn journal close to her chest, she paused for a moment to let her eyes adjust to the subdued light, taking in the timeless elegance of the carriage. The seats were plush but faded, the brass fixtures dulled by years of use, and the windows framed the encroaching night like portals to another world. Around her, murmurs of other passengers filled the space, soft voices laden with a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and something deeper, unspoken. Evelyn's gaze flickered to the faces around her, a man with a restless energy that seemed to ripple beneath his casual exterior, a woman whose gentle presence radiated quiet strength, and others whose expressions were veiled in contemplation. At that moment, Marcus Wren entered. He moved with a confident, almost restless gait, his tousled blonde hair catching the faint light as he scanned the carriage with sharp, searching eyes. His casual dress jeans and a worn leather jacket belied the sharpness of his jawline and the intensity in his gaze. With a sardonic smile, he broke the fragile silence, his voice cutting through the murmurs with a quick-witted remark that drew a few tentative smiles and guarded glances. "Well, this place certainly has a charm," Marcus said, his tone laced with irony as he settled into a vacant seat, like stepping back into a dream where nothing quite makes sense. Evelyn turned toward him, noting the restless energy that seemed to ripple beneath his easy demeanor. There was something raw and unguarded in his cynicism, a tension that suggested deeper wounds lurking beneath the surface. She made a small, polite nod but said nothing, choosing instead to watch as Clara Lynn approached. Clara moved with a gentle grace, her delicate features softened by the warm glow of the carriage lamps. Always carrying a small sketchbook, she settled beside Evelyn, her fingers tracing faint shapes on the worn cover. Her voice was soft but steady as she spoke. "It's strange, isn't it? How a place can feel both familiar and utterly alien, Clara mused, like the echo of a memory you can't quite grasp. Evelyn offered a tentative smile, her eyes meeting Clara's with a spark of recognition. In that quiet exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of understanding that hinted at the comfort of shared stories yet to be told. As the passengers began to settle, the conductor materialized at the far end of the carriage. His presence was subtle yet commanding, an ageless figure dressed in a vintage uniform, eyes shifting like smoke that seemed to hold the weight of countless journeys. He moved with measured steps, his gaze sweeping the compartment as if reading the silent burdens each traveler carried. Without a word, the conductor's presence filled the space with an unspoken promise and a quiet warning. This journey would be unlike any other, a passage through the tangled labyrinth of regrets and the roads not taken. The train's engine rumbled to life, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor and into the bones of the passengers. Outside the windows, the forgotten rail yard began to blur into a landscape both real and surreal, shifting with a dreamlike fluidity that unsettled and fascinated in equal measure. Marcus leaned back, his sharp eyes catching Evelyn's thoughtful gaze. "You don't talk much," he observed, a teasing lilt in his voice. She smiled faintly, closing her journal. "Some stories need time to be told." Clara nodded in agreement. "And some regrets need an audience to be understood." The carriage hummed with a quiet energy, the interplay of contrasting personalities weaving a complex tapestry of tension and tentative connection. Evelyn's reflective calm met Marcus's restless cynicism, while Clara's nurturing warmth offered a fragile balm to the simmering unease. Outside, the night deepened, the train's wheels beginning their steady rhythm on the rails. Inside, the passengers braced themselves for the journey ahead, an odyssey through the echoes of their pasts, where each story held the promise of confrontation, understanding, and perhaps redemption. As the train slipped quietly into motion, the conductor's eyes glimmered with inscrutable light. The road not taken stretched before them, winding through the shadowed realms of memory and possibility. And in the heart of the Fable engine, the first whispers of regret began to stir, ready to transform into the stories that would define their journey. The air was thick with anticipation, the fragile balance between hope and fear palpable as the train carried them deeper into the night. Each passenger felt the invisible threads of their lives tugging them toward the unknown, where the boundaries between past and present, reality and dream, would soon dissolve. In this liminal space, the Fable engine promised no easy answers, only the haunting, beautiful challenge of facing the roads not taken and the stories that lingered in their wake. The journey had begun. The Fable engine was no ordinary train. As its ancient wheels began to turn, the world outside the windows shifted and shimmered, blurring the lines between memory and possibility. Inside, passengers found themselves suspended in a space where time folded upon itself, where choices made and unmade wove intricate patterns of what could have been. Evelyn Hart, standing near a window framed in brass and frosted glass, watched the scenery dissolve into soft waves of colored dusk bleeding into dawn, the horizon bending like a dream. She felt the subtle hum beneath her feet, the heartbeat of the train carrying more than mere passengers. It carried burdens, sorrows, and fragile hopes. Across the carriage, Marcus Wren settled into a worn leather seat, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the armrest. The casual smirk he wore struggled to mask the tension beneath a man both fascinated and wary of the journey ahead. Near him, Clara Lynn opened her small sketchbook, the pencil in her hand poised to capture the fleeting images that the train's shifting light conjured. Old Man Weaver, in his creaking wooden chair, began weaving a tale whose threads stretched beyond the confines of the carriage, binding the passengers in a shared tapestry of stories. Evelyn's world began to ripple. The carriage walls softened and faded, replaced by the familiar warmth of a modest living room. She saw herself years younger, her hair darker and unmarked by silver knitting, beside a small figure with bright eyes and a mischievous smile. Her daughter. The embrace was gentle, aching with the weight of years lost and the tenderness of a bond never severed. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the faintest hint of lilac, evoking memories both painful and precious. Evelyn's breath caught as she reached out, fingers trembling, yearning to bridge the chasm between past and present. Meanwhile, Marcus's compartment darkened, walls adorned with faded photographs that seemed to pulse with life. A vision unfolded, a sunlit garden party where laughter rang out, glasses raised in celebration. He saw himself, younger and hopeful, entwined with a woman whose smile held promises now broken. The echoes of joy and regret collided within him, stirring a vulnerability he had long buried beneath layers of cynicism and charm. The harsh edges of his reality softened, revealing the fragile core beneath. The conductor moved silently among the carriages, his eyes like shifting smoke reflecting the myriad lives intertwined aboard the train. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, a guardian of journeys, yet unsure of their outcomes. He offered no answers, only the invitation to confront the shadows of regret and to listen to the stories that emerged from the depths of the passengers' souls. Old Man Weaver's voice rose, a soft cadence that wove through the murmurs and gasps. His tales mirrored the lives unfolding in the carriages, stories within stories that blurred boundaries and invited reflection. Passengers found themselves, narrators and audience alike, sharing fragments of their alternate selves, their regrets rendered in vivid, living color, as the train pressed onward through landscapes that defied logic, forests that whispered forgotten secrets, rivers that flowed backward, skies painted with impossible hues. The passengers were drawn deeper into the mysteries of their own hearts. Evelyn's encounter with her alternate life ignited a flicker of hope, a desire to heal old wounds. Marcus's glimpse of love lost softened his defenses, opening a path toward forgiveness. The journey had only just begun, but already the passengers felt the weight and wonder of the stories that the Fable engine carried. Each door opened not just to another world, but to the possibility of understanding, redemption, and the fragile beauty of what might have been. As the train rumbled into the unknown, the echoes of their choices sang a bittersweet melody, one that promised transformation for those brave enough to listen. Yet, as the landscapes shifted and the boundaries of reality thinned, a quiet question lingered in the air. How would these encounters with alternate lives shape the passengers' acceptance of their own? Would they find solace in the stories, or be consumed by the shadows they evoked? The Fable engine held its breath, waiting for the next chapter in the intertwined tales of regret, hope, and the enduring power of storytelling. The narrow corridors of the Fable engine twisted like veins through the heart of the antique train. Each carriage a chamber where time folded and memories bled into one another. In the fourth carriage, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of tobacco, mingling with a subtle undercurrent of something indefinably ancient, perhaps, the weight of stories yet untold. Jonas Gray stood near the window, his tall frame casting a stark silhouette against the shifting twilight outside. His close-cropped hair caught the dim light, the faint lines etched across his forehead deepening as he listened. Around him, a small group of passengers had gathered, drawn by the gravity of his presence, though most kept wary distance. Jonas's eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces before him, a silent challenge flickering in their depths. "I don't believe in this train's magic," Jonas began, his voice low but carrying a razor's edge. "Stories are just stories. They don't change the past, and they certainly don't erase the pain." A murmur rippled through the group. Evelyn Hart, seated quietly nearby, met his gaze with a steady calm. She had learned that silence was often the precursor to revelation, and now she watched as Jonas's cynicism began to crack. "What are you so afraid to face, Jonas?" Clara Lynn's gentle voice interrupted, breaking the tension like a soft breeze through autumn leaves. She held her sketchbook tightly, her fingers tracing the worn edges, as if drawing strength from their familiarity. Jonas shifted uncomfortably, but did not retreat. "My brother," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper, "lost him years ago. It tore my family apart. And no matter how many stories I tell myself, that wound never heals." The carriage seemed to hold its breath. Clara's eyes softened, and Evelyn felt the weight of Jonas's admission settle like a stone in the pit of her stomach. The rawness of his grief cracked the veneer of their shared journey, revealing the fragile humanity beneath. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner, Clara's pencil danced across the pages of her sketchbook. Her delicate features were etched with a mix of concentration and sorrow. The lines she drew were not merely shapes, but fragments of a life she had chosen. Against the career opportunity she had declined for family, the sacrifices that lingered like shadows at the edges of her smile. Evelyn noticed the trembling in Clara's hands and approached with tentative steps, settling beside her without breaking the fragile silence. Words seemed unnecessary. Their shared experience filled the space between them, a silent dialogue of empathy and understanding. "It's hard, isn't it?" Evelyn murmured, her voice soft but steady. "Choosing one path means letting go of another." Clara nodded, her eyes reflecting a well of unspoken regrets. "Sometimes I wonder what the other life would have looked like. But maybe it's the stories we tell ourselves that give those possibilities meaning." As the train hummed beneath their feet, a flickering lantern in the center of the carriage cast long shadows. Old Man Weaver, the train's enigmatic storyteller, settled into his place by the light, his weathered face illuminated by the gentle glow. His eyes gleamed with quiet wisdom as he began to weave a tale. His voice was a soft cadence, rising and falling like a lullaby and a warning intertwined. He spoke of a distant village where the inhabitants lived with their regrets carved into the walls of their homes, stories etched not in ink but in the very fabric of their lives. As his narrative unfolded, the passengers felt the boundaries between their own sorrows and the mythic world dissolve, the air thickening with a dreamlike haze that wrapped around them like a shroud. The stories Old Man Weaver told were not mere distractions. They held mirrors to the passengers' souls, reflecting their fears, hopes, and the tangled threads of their alternate lives. In this surreal space, fiction and reality danced an intricate waltz, each step revealing deeper truths. Jonas, Clara, and Evelyn found themselves drawn into the narrative web, their personal struggles entwined with the broader tapestry of regret and redemption. The carriage became a crucible where walls of skepticism and silence melted away, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of connection. Yet beneath the enchantment lingered the unyielding tension of truth, the hard reckoning that awaited each passenger as the train pressed onward through shifting landscapes of time and memory. The stories told here were not endings but beginnings, invitations to confront the shadows that haunted their hearts. As the lantern's light flickered and the train's rhythm pulsed steadily beneath them, The passengers settled into a shared space of vulnerability. The lines between teller and listener blurred, revealing that, in the act of storytelling, they might find not just solace, but the courage to face the roads not taken. Outside, the world shifted in surreal brushstrokes, glimmers of landscapes both familiar and strange while inside. The carriages hummed with the quiet symphony of tales unfolding. The Fable engine, with its timeless design and enigmatic power, carried its passengers deeper into the labyrinth of their own regrets. Each story a thread woven into the vast tapestry of what might have been. As the chapter drew to a close, the passengers sat enveloped in the train's warm, somber glow, the weight of their shared revelations settling like dust. The journey was far from over, but in this moment, amid whispered confessions and mythic tales, a subtle shift had begun, a fragile promise that even amidst regret, stories could illuminate the path toward understanding and, perhaps, redemption. And as Old Man Weaver's voice softened into silence, the passengers knew that the tales in the carriages were only the beginning of what the Fable engine had in store. The carriage hummed with a heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic clatter of wheels against rail. Evelyn Hart sat nestled in the corner seat, her fingers trembling as they gripped the worn leather cover of her journal. The dim glow of the carriage lamps cast long shadows across the faded upholstery, shadows that seemed to stretch and twist like the regrets she carried deep inside. She exhaled slowly, attempting to steady the fluttering in her chest, but the memories pressed in relentlessly. Outside, the world blurred and shifted, the landscape dissolving into a surreal mosaic of darkened trees and flickering lights. It was as if the train itself was breathing, pulsing with the weight of untold stories and unsaid apologies. Evelyn's pen hovered above the paper, hesitant, as if the act of writing could summon ghosts she dared not face. The scratch of her pen finally broke the silence, tentative words spilling onto the page. If I could turn back the clock, if only to hold you once more. Across the aisle, Marcus Wren leaned heavily against the cold window pane, his breath fogging the glass in lazy swirls. His tousled blonde hair fell carelessly over a sharp jawline that was usually set in a confident smirk. But tonight, that mask was slipping. The tremor in his voice betrayed the restless cynicism he wielded like armor. "Funny," he muttered to no one in particular, "how the roads you didn't take haunt you the loudest." He glanced away from the window, eyes darkening with memories of a love he'd left behind, an engagement broken off in a fit of youthful arrogance and fear. The laughter and lightness of his usual banter were absent, replaced by a gnawing ache that he shoved down, desperate not to show weakness. Yet here, amid the shifting timelines and surreal landscapes, the weight of his choices pressed in with relentless force. The conductor's presence grew more palpable. Emerging from the shadows of the corridor, he moved with an ageless grace, his vintage uniform crisp despite the ethereal atmosphere. His eyes, shifting like smoke, scanned the passengers with a silent intensity that sent shivers down spines. His voice, when it came, was calm but carried an edge that unsettled even the most guarded souls. "The crossroads you face are not merely of the past, but of what you choose to carry forward," he intoned, his gaze locking briefly with Evelyn's before moving on. Evelyn's heart pounded. The conductor's words echoed in the hollow spaces of her mind, challenging the walls of avoidance she'd built around her guilt. She had long hidden behind silence and distance, afraid that confronting her daughter's memory would shatter the fragile piece she'd cobbled together. But the train, the conductor, and these alternate lives were demanding something more: courage, acceptance, the painful act of facing what she'd left behind. Nearby, Clara Lynn sat quietly, her delicate features illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. The small sketchbook she carried was open on her lap, its pages filled with delicate lines and faint watercolors. She reached out gently, placing a comforting hand on Evelyn's arm. The touch was light, yet it carried the weight of empathy and understanding. Their eyes met, sharing a silent conversation of shared regrets and tentative hope. "You don't have to carry it alone," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the low murmur of the train. Evelyn nodded, the tightness in her chest loosening just a fraction. It was a small moment of connection, but it grounded her in the swirling uncertainty of the journey. Marcus shifted uneasily, catching a fragment of their exchange. His usual deflection surfaced a quick joke, a sharp comment, but beneath it lay a flicker of something new, the stirring of vulnerability. He glanced at the conductor, who now stood at the far end of the carriage, his figure a dark silhouette against the flickering lights. The conductor's gaze swept over the passengers like a judge weighing their souls. His role was neither cruel nor kind. He was an arbiter of fate, a test of resolve. He challenged each passenger to confront the tension between acceptance and denial, to grapple with the consequences of their choices. The train itself seemed to respond, accelerating subtly, the boundaries between timelines growing thin and porous. Evelyn's thoughts spiraled back to her daughter, the lost years, the empty phone calls, the silent nights haunted by what might have been. Her journal lay open, the ink drying on words she barely dared say aloud. The train's surreal atmosphere pressed around her, but within that pressure she felt the fragile stirrings of acceptance. Marcus's charm faltered again as he stared into the fogged window, shadows of self-destruction flickering behind his eyes. Yet amidst the turmoil, he felt the faintest pull towards something he'd long resisted. The possibility of forgiveness, of vulnerability as strength rather than weakness. The carriage walls seemed to pulse with the collective heartbeat of the passengers, each wrestling with their own crossroads of choice. The conductor's presence was a reminder that the journey was far from over. In this liminal space between past and future, between regret and hope, every decision mattered. As the train rolled onward through shifting landscapes and blurred realities, Evelyn closed her journal with a steady hand. She would face her past not with denial, but with the courage to accept and, perhaps, to begin anew. Marcus straightened, a tentative smile breaking through the cynicism. The conductor's eyes glimmered with inscrutable meaning, as if acknowledging the first steps toward transformation. The crossroads stretched ahead, uncertain and fraught. Yet amid the shadows, a fragile light flickered, promise and peril entwined in the journey yet to come. And with that, the Fable engine surged forward, carrying its passengers deeper into the tangled web of their alternate lives and the choices that defined them. The carriage was dipped in a gentle glow cast by antique lamps whose light seemed to flicker with the rhythm of the train's steady clatter. Evelyn Hart sat beside the window, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover of her journal while her eyes absorbed the muted dance of shadows on the opposite wall. Across from her, Clara Lynn's delicate hands moved deftly over the pages of a small sketchbook, pencil strokes capturing fleeting impressions of the carriage's interior, the curve of a brass railing, the soft folds of a passenger's coat, the way the light pooled in the corner like a quiet secret. A hush had settled among the passengers, a shared breath held between stories and silences. The train's surreal ambience seemed to cocoon them from the outside world, a timeless vessel drifting through shifting landscapes where the past and present intertwined. Evelyn felt the weight of her own story pressing softly against her chest, tempered by Clara's calm presence nearby. There was an unspoken understanding between them, two women carrying burdens of regret, learning to share the heavy load. "It's strange," Clara murmured, her voice barely above the whisper of the rails beneath them. "How sometimes the stories we don't tell are the loudest ones in our minds." Evelyn nodded, her gaze drifting to the raindrops tracing lazy paths down the window pane. "I've been writing about my daughter," she confessed, trying to imagine the moments we lost, the words left unsaid. Clara smiled gently, her pencil pausing mid-sketch. "Sometimes telling the story is the first step to making peace with it." Nearby, Marcus Wren leaned back in his seat, a sly grin playing on his lips as he interrupted with a jest aimed at breaking the thickening atmosphere. "Well, if we're all confessing, I suppose I should admit I'm just here for the free ride and the complimentary existential crisis." A ripple of laughter spread through the carriage, momentarily lifting the heaviness. But as the mirth faded, Evelyn caught the fleeting shadow behind Marcus's eyes, a sudden tightness, a crack in the mask of cynicism he wore so well. "You always use humor like armor," Clara observed softly, watching him carefully. "What are you really hiding from?" Marcus's smile wavered, and for a brief moment, vulnerability flickered across his face before he shrugged off the question. "Maybe it's easier to joke than to feel." In the corner, Jonas Gray stood with arms crossed, his expression a mixture of skepticism and frustration. "Easy answers don't cut it here," he said sharply, fixing his gaze on a young woman recounting her story. "Regret isn't some neat puzzle to solve. It's messy, and sometimes it's just pain with no redemption." The room grew quieter as the other passengers absorbed his words. Jonas's bluntness unsettled some, but it also pierced through the layers of polite sharing, forcing a deeper reckoning. Evelyn met his eyes briefly, sensing the guarded walls he had built around himself. "Maybe we need to face the mess to find any kind of peace," she said quietly. The conductor, ever present but seldom intrusive, moved silently through the train, his gaze shifting like smoke through the dim light. Outside the window, the world blurred and warped, the trees bent at impossible angles, skies smeared with colors that defied earthly hues. The train itself seemed to respond to the passengers' stirring emotions, the boundaries between timelines softening, melting like the edges of a dream. Old Man Weaver, seated near the fireplace, began weaving a tale in his gravelly voice, the story mirroring the passengers' struggles with an uncanny resonance. His words wove sorrow and hope into a tapestry that blurred the line between reality and fiction, drawing the listeners deeper into the shared experience. As the carriage hummed with quiet revelations and fragile connections, Evelyn felt the stirrings of something new, a tentative hope, born from the willingness to confront pain and share it openly. The journey was no longer just a passage through alternate lives. It was becoming a collective voyage toward understanding and acceptance. Yet beneath the surface, tensions simmered. Marcus's humor, faltering, hinted at battles yet to be fought within himself. Jonas's challenges threatened to unravel the fragile trust forming among the passengers. And the train's surreal transformations whispered that the merging realities would soon demand more than stories. They would demand truth. Evelyn closed her journal gently, a renewed determination settling in her chest. The mirror of the train's carriages reflected not just the faces of those aboard, but the myriad reflections of their regrets, hopes, and the possibilities that lay beyond the roads not taken. As the train sped onward through the shifting twilight, Evelyn whispered to herself, "To face the past is to open the door to what might still be." The carriage lights dimmed, casting long shadows that flickered and danced an invitation to step deeper into the stories yet untold. And in that moment, the train was not just a vessel of regret, but a crucible of transformation, where the boundaries of time and self began to dissolve, and the journey toward redemption truly began. The carriage hummed with a quiet energy, the air thick with the unspoken. Evelyn Hart stood at the threshold of a door that shimmered softly, a subtle ripple in the fabric of the train's surreal landscape. Beyond it lay a timeline she had scarcely dared to imagine, one where she had not abandoned her daughter. Her breath caught as she reached out, the wooden frame warm beneath her fingertips. She stepped through. The world shifted instantly. Gone was the dim, echoing hum of the antique train. In its place, a sun-drenched kitchen blossomed around her. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, mingling with the faintest hint of lavender soap. The walls were alive with memories, framed photographs of birthdays, school plays, and quiet family dinners. A small hand slipped into hers, delicate and sure. "Mum." The voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it vibrated with hope and innocence. Evelyn turned to see a girl of about 8, her eyes wide with wonder and familiar trust. For a moment, time folded neatly, and the silence that had once defined their estrangement was replaced with laughter and warmth. Yet beneath the joy, a shadow lingered, the knowledge that this was not her real life, not her true timeline. She knelt to meet the girl's gaze, her heart aching with the bittersweet weight of what could have been. "I'm here," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm here now." The girl smiled, radiant and unburdened, before skipping toward the garden beyond the kitchen window. Evelyn's eyes traced the sunlight dancing on the leaves, each ray a reminder of opportunities lost and love deferred. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the train, Marcus Wren sat alone in a dimly lit lounge car. His blonde hair was tousled, and his sharp jawline was softened by the flickering shadows cast by the ornate lamp. His fingers tapped an erratic rhythm on the polished wood, betraying an agitation that his usual sardonic smile failed to mask. Images swirled in his mind, the engagement ring he had once worn, gleaming with promise. The laughter of his childhood sweetheart, now a haunting echo. The silent phone calls and the final, irrevocable goodbye. His chest tightened as memories collided with the present, blurring the line between regret and resentment. A dry chuckle escaped him. "What a fool," he muttered, eyes narrowing. All that could have been wasted on fear and pride. The rhythmic clatter of the train against the tracks seemed to mirror his racing thoughts, a relentless reminder of time slipping away. Yet beneath the cynicism, a fragile hope began to stir, a tentative question of whether forgiveness, especially of oneself, was truly beyond reach. From the shadows stepped the conductor, his figure ethereal yet commanding, clad in a vintage uniform that seemed untouched by time. His eyes shifted like smoke, elusive, deep, and infinitely knowing. He approached Marcus with a measured grace, the faintest smile playing at his lips. "You carry your regrets like chains," he said softly, "but the paths you see are not prisons, they are possibilities. Look beyond the pain, Marcus. What do you see?" Marcus's gaze followed the conductor's gesture toward the window. There, fragmented scenes flickered, alternate lives shimmering like reflections on water. Each fragment was a story, a choice, a consequence. "Nothing but ghosts," Marcus replied, voice heavy. "Why haunt me with what I can never have?" "Because only by facing the ghosts can you be free," the conductor whispered, fading back into the mist of the carriage. Elsewhere, Clara Lynn sat quietly in a corner, her sketchbook resting on her lap. Her pencil danced lightly across the page, capturing the fleeting essence of Evelyn's alternate life, the sunlight filtering through the kitchen window, the curve of the girl's smile, the tenderness in Evelyn's eyes, The soft scratch of graphite on paper mingled with the murmur of stories shared among passengers, creating a tapestry of empathy and connection. Clara glanced up, meeting Evelyn's gaze with a gentle understanding. "Sometimes," she said softly, "seeing what might have been helps us find peace with what is." Evelyn nodded, clutching her journal close. The journey through this alternate timeline had revealed the fragile beauty woven into loss and regret, a bittersweet truth that acceptance was not surrender, but a form of courage. As the train's rhythmic pulse continued, the passengers found themselves bound by threads of memory, hope, and the stories they told themselves. Each fragment of what could have been was a mirror, reflecting not only pain but also the possibility of transformation. The carriage began to shimmer once more, signaling the end of the passage. Evelyn took a final, lingering look at the sunlit kitchen before stepping back through the threshold. The scent of lavender and bread faded, replaced again by the familiar hum of the train. Marcus exhaled slowly, the weight in his chest slightly lessened. The conductor's words echoed in his mind, a challenge and an invitation. Evelyn closed her journal, her pen poised for the next entry, a testament to a journey not just through parallel timelines, but into the depths of the human heart. As the train carried its passengers onward, the line between what was lost and what might yet be blurred, weaving a story that was at once sorrowful and filled with tentative hope. The Fable engine moved not just through landscapes of time, but through the very essence of regret and redemption, inviting all aboard to face the fragments of their own could-have-beens. And so, with the carriage door closing softly behind her, Evelyn prepared to meet the next chapter of her journey, uncertain, fragile, and alive with possibility. The carriage was dim, washed in the soft glow of antique sconces, their light flickering against polished wood and faded upholstery. The passengers, once quietly murmuring to themselves or retreating into solitude, now sat in a charged silence, the kind that precedes upheaval. Jonas Gray stood near the center, his tall frame rigid, his frown deepening as his gaze swept the group. His voice broke the hush, sharp and unyielding. "We sit here, pretending the past is a closed book," Jonas said, eyes narrowing. "But every one of us carries a story we're too afraid to tell. We dress it up, hide it behind polite smiles or silence, but it's there, festering, and it's poisoning us." A murmur rose in the room, uneasy and fragmented. Evelyn Hart shifted in her seat, clutching her worn journal tightly. Her silver-streaked hair framed a face etched with quiet torment. She had come aboard the Fable engine, seeking confrontation with her regrets, yet now, faced with Jonas's raw challenge, she felt the familiar urge to retreat inward. Clara Lynn watched the exchange with gentle eyes, her delicate features softening with empathy. She had sensed the growing tension the walls passengers were building around their pain. Rising quietly, she approached Evelyn, her small sketchbook tucked under one arm. Her voice was a whisper, tender and deliberate. "Evelyn," she said, "sometimes the heaviest silence is the one we keep with ourselves. But sharing Evan a little can lighten the burden." Evelyn looked up, meeting Clara's gaze, and for a moment the weight of her guilt seemed to lift as a fragile thread of connection wove between them. Jonas's bitterness was not just anger. It was a shield, forged from years of loss and unresolved pain. "I'm tired of pretending," he confessed, voice cracking. "Pretending that what happened to my brother never happened, that I didn't walk away when I should have stayed." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. The other passengers shifted, some swallowing hard, others nodding slowly in reluctant acknowledgement. Evelyn's breath caught. Her own regrets abandoning her daughter, fleeing a fractured family, felt suddenly unbearable. The conductor stood silently near the doorway, an ageless figure cloaked in a vintage uniform. His eyes, like tendrils of smoke, flickered as if absorbing the charged atmosphere. He said nothing, but his presence was an unspoken reminder. The passengers were here to confront these truths, no matter how painful. Outside, the world beyond the train window twisted subtly. Trees bent at impossible angles, skies rippled in strange hues, and distant mountains shimmered like mirages. The surreal landscape mirrored the passengers' inner turmoil, the train hurtling deeper into the metaphysical labyrinth of their regrets. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she opened her journal, the pages filled with half-formed thoughts and hesitant confessions. She began to write, her pen tracing the contours of her guilt and longing. Clara sat beside her, sketching softly the lines on her page, weaving a quiet narrative of hope and renewal. Jonas sank into a worn seat, his eyes distant but less guarded. The confrontation had cracked the veneer of bitterness, allowing a glimmer of vulnerability to seep through. The group's dynamic shifted where once there had been avoidance. Now there was a fragile openness. The carriage grew still, save for the gentle hum of the wheels on the tracks, steady rhythm echoing the beat of hearts slowly unburdening. The weight of silence was no longer oppressive, but a space pregnant with possibility. Yet beneath the fragile calm lurked the question that would propel them further. Could they truly face the shadows of their pasts without fracturing beneath the strain? And if they faltered, what would the price be? The train moved onward, its ancient engine a pulse beneath the surreal night, carrying its passengers toward the unknown. Inside, stories waited to be told, wounds to be healed or deepened. Evelyn closed her journal briefly, eyes meeting Clara's. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me I'm not alone." Clara smiled softly, a beacon in the gathering dusk. "We're all in this together." Jonas's voice broke the quiet again, softer now. "Maybe it's time we stopped running." The weight of silence lifted just enough to let hope creep in. But the journey was far from over. The Fable engine was not merely a vessel, it was a crucible, forging the passengers anew in the fires of their regrets. As the train pressed forward, the passengers braced themselves. The next chapters of their stories awaited, darker and more revealing. But for this moment, in this fragile peace, they had taken the first step toward healing. Outside, the night deepened, the surreal landscape folding and unfolding like a living dream. Inside, the passengers listened, waited, and prepared to face what lay ahead. And somewhere in the shadows, the conductor watched, his smoky eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. The test had begun in earnest. The tension would rise, the truths would come, and the weight of silence would never be quite the same again. The carriage hummed softly with the rhythmic clatter of wheels against iron rails, a steady heartbeat beneath the whispered murmurs of its passengers. In the corner, the dim glow of a flickering oil lamp cast elongated shadows that danced along the worn wood paneling, painting the space with an almost sacred intimacy. Old Man Weaver settled into his seat, his weathered hands clasping a tattered leather-bound book as his deep-set eyes scanned the faces gathered around him, each etched with the weight of silent regrets. He cleared his throat, the sound rough like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten forest. "Have you ever wondered," he began, his voice a textured murmur, "how a single choice might ripple through the fabric of our lives? How the faintest whisper of a decision not taken can echo louder than the loudest shout?" The passengers leaned in, drawn by the quiet gravity of his words. Evelyn Hart, clutching her worn journal, felt the familiar stir of something unnamably mixture of anticipation and apprehension as she settled deeper into her seat. the train's windows blurred with the mist of rain, the world outside transforming into a watercolor dreamscape, indistinct and shifting. Old Man Weaver's tale unfolded like a tapestry woven from threads of memory and myth. He spoke of a man who, faced with a fork in the road, chose the path less traveled, only to find that the journey led not to triumph, but to unexpected sorrow. Yet in that sorrow lay a hidden beauty, a lesson etched in the scars of what might have been. As his voice wove through the carriage, the passengers found themselves mirrored in the story's shadows. Marcus Wren, sitting across from Evelyn, let out a sharp laugh. His blonde hair tousled in defiance against the train's gentle sway. "Sounds like a story about me," he quipped, his eyes flashing with a blend of cynicism and something softer, more vulnerable. Evelyn's gaze flickered to him, sensing the brittle armor beneath his charm. He was a man who wielded humor like a shield, deflecting the raw edges of regret with wit and sarcasm. Yet tonight, the cracks in that shield seemed wider, the laughter more brittle. Clara Lynn sat nearby, her delicate fingers tracing the edges of her small sketchbook. She captured not just the figures around her, but the very atmosphere, the interplay of light and shadow, the muted colors of the train's interior, and the intangible threads of shared sorrow binding them. Her sketches whispered stories unspoken, offering a silent comfort to those too burdened for words. Evelyn opened her journal, the familiar texture of the pages grounding her amidst the swirling emotions. She began to write, her pen moving steadily as she recorded not only the tales Old Man Weaver told, but also the stories emerging from the hearts of her fellow passengers. Each entry was a bridge, connecting isolated islands of pain into a collective archipelago of understanding. The act of storytelling became a bomb, transforming the passengers' regrets from heavy chains into threads of shared humanity. Marcus's sharp jabs softened as he listened, the laughter that once concealed his pain giving way to moments of quiet reflection. Evelyn's own silence, once a refuge from confrontation, began to crack, revealing a well of empathy and courage. Old Man Weaver's final words lingered in the air long after his story ended. To tell our stories is to reclaim them from the shadows. In the telling, we find not just sorrow, but also the seeds of hope. The carriage settled into a contemplative hush. Outside, the train raced onward through the night, carrying its passengers not just through space, but through the labyrinthine corridors of their own hearts. The journey was far from over, but in this moment, the power of storytelling had woven a fragile thread of connection, one that promised transformation and the possibility of redemption. Evelyn glanced around the carriage, catching the eyes of Marcus, Clara, and others. Each face told a story, each story a step toward understanding. She closed her journal slowly, a quiet determination blossoming within her. The roads not taken still beckoned, but now they were paths illuminated by the light of shared narrative. As the train approached the next station, a subtle shift rippled through the passengers, a collective breath held, a moment poised on the cusp of revelation. The stories within stories had begun to unravel the knots of regret, setting the stage for the confrontations and transformations yet to come. And somewhere near the front of the train, the conductor watched with eyes like shifting smoke, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on his lips. Time was bending, reality was thinning. The Fable engine was accelerating toward a threshold where all truths would be laid bare. The passengers braced themselves, knowing that the next chapters of their journey would demand not just listening, but reckoning. The stories they told tonight were but the first light in a gathering dawn, one that promised both pain and profound hope. "Tell me," Old Man Weaver whispered, his voice barely audible over the steady clatter. What story will you choose to live tomorrow? The question hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation. Somewhere in the intertwining tales, the passengers sensed that their answers would shape not only their own fates, but the very essence of the Fable engine itself. The night deepened, the train surged forward, and the stories continued to weave endless, intricate, and alive. The Fable engine hummed deeper into a realm where reality itself seemed to unravel. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks morphed into a more chaotic symphony, the sound of shifting time and fractured memories. Outside the cabin windows, the familiar landscape dissolved into a churning mist, a swirling vortex of fragmented moments and parallel timelines bleeding into one another. Passengers sat or stood, each caught in a liminal pause, their hearts pounding with the weight of impending revelation. Evelyn Hart gripped the edge of her seat, her gaze fixed on the hazy window pane. The silver streaks in her dark hair shimmered with the carriage light's flicker, reflecting the turmoil within her. The train's walls seemed to pulse, breathing in unison with the collective unease. Her journal lay open on her lap. The inked words blurred as if the stories they contained were dissolving into the very air. Across the carriage, Marcus Wren's usual sardonic smirk had faded. His sharp jaw clenched, and his tousled blonde hair seemed almost electric in the dim light. He stared at his own reflection in the glass, watching as it fractured into multiple selves, each a haunting silhouette embodying the roads not taken, the broken promises and the lost love he had buried beneath layers of cynical humor. The conductor appeared abruptly at the doorway, stepping forward with the grace of one who moves between worlds. His vintage uniform was impeccable, yet his eyes shifted like smoke, never resting on one point for long. He spoke softly, but with an authority that silenced the hum of the train. "You have crossed the threshold," he intoned. "Here, time is fluid, and your choices ripple across realities. This is the realm where your regrets take form, and your truths are laid bare." Evelyn rose, her legs trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Before her, the carriage walls shimmered and parted like a veil, revealing a figure bathed in soft golden light, herself, but different. This spectral Evelyn was the woman who had never left her daughter, whose hands still bore the warmth of a mother's embrace. Their eyes met, and the silence between them echoed with unspoken apologies and longing. The encounter was a crucible. Evelyn felt the sharp sting of guilt, but beneath it blossomed a fragile seed of courage. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and in that simple act, the space between past and present began to collapse. The golden light softened, merging slowly with the carriage's dim interior. Meanwhile, Marcus wrestled with the fragmented selves reflected in the window. Each image flickered, a man who had married, another who had fought harder for love, a version lost to bitterness and solitude. His voice, usually sharp with wit, cracked as he muttered, "Maybe I was afraid to be vulnerable." Clara Lynn, seated nearby, watched him with quiet empathy, her delicate features etched with concern. Jonas Gray, standing by the carriage door, folded his arms, his usual cynicism tempered by the palpable shift in the air. Old Man Weaver began weaving a tale, a story within the story, his voice a soothing thread that tied together the passengers' fragmented selves. His narrative spoke of choice and consequence, of shadowed paths and the light found beyond them. The conductor's presence grew more intense, his smoky eyes reflecting endless corridors of time. "This train," he murmured, "is no mere vessel. It is a crucible where fate and free will collide. To move forward, you must reckon with what you see, not to change the past, but to awaken to the present." As the train surged onward, the boundaries between timelines blurred. Passengers felt themselves stretched, pulled between who they were, who they might have been, and who they could yet become. The metaphysical threshold was not merely a place, but an experience, a reckoning of soul and story. Evelyn, standing taller now, closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The weight of years lifted slightly. The tangled threads of regret began to untwist. Marcus's guarded walls cracked, allowing a sliver of hope to seep through. The chapter closed on a scene of fragile transformation, a train speeding through the twilight of intertwined realities, carrying souls toward revelation and, perhaps, redemption. As the carriage lights dimmed and the mist thickened once more, the passengers braced themselves for what lay beyond the threshold, where stories and selves would collide in the crucible of truth. Beyond this point, the conductor whispered, "There is no turning back." And with that, the Fable engine plunged deeper into the unknown. The carriage hummed softly, the old train's heart beating in a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the pulse of the passengers within. Marcus Wren sat alone by the narrow window, a subtle crease of thought knitting his brow as he watched the shifting landscape blur into streams of muted color. The rhythmic clatter of the rails was punctuated only by the occasional distant whistle, a lonely call that seemed to resonate with the turmoil inside him. His fingers absently traced the worn leather armrest, each touch stirring a cascade of memories, fragments of laughter and whispered promises from a life long since left behind. The engagement broken, the dreams abandoned. He had spent years cloaked in cynicism, armor forged from disappointment and self-reproach. Yet tonight, in the quiet solitude of the carriage, that armor felt less impenetrable. Across the train, Evelyn Hart sat near the window, her silver-streaked hair catching the faint glow of lanterns swaying gently overhead. She watched with quiet fascination as Lila, the young passenger whose presence had become a beacon of innocence on this surreal journey, sketched in a small notebook. The child's delicate hands moved steadily across the page, capturing shadows and light with an ease that belied the strange world they traveled through. For Evelyn, Lila was more than just a fellow traveler. She was a living symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest corridors of regret, light could find a way in. The woman's thoughtful eyes softened as she observed the child, a warmth kindling within her chest that had long been dormant. It was as if, through Lila, Evelyn glimpsed the possibility of forgiveness, not just from others, but from herself. Nearby, Jonas Gray stood by a fogged window, the glass streaked with rain that mirrored the turmoil deep within his guarded heart. His tall frame was tense, yet the perpetual frown that usually marked his features had softened, if only imperceptibly, as he stared out at the blurred world beyond. Memories surfaced, unbidden fragments of laughter, sorrow, and the ghost of a sibling lost too soon. The weight of those memories pressed on him, yet there was a subtle shift. The bitterness that had once defined his interactions with the others began to give way to a fragile vulnerability. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jonas allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, acknowledging the pain rather than fleeing from it. As the train rolled onward, the passengers found themselves drawn together in the lounge car, a space where the boundaries between their stories began to dissolve. Their voices, once hesitant and guarded, now wove together in a tapestry of shared experience. Marcus's humor, tinged with newfound sincerity, sparked gentle laughter. Evelyn's calm presence offered steady reassurance. Jonas's sharp mind softened, opening to the possibility of connection. In this gathering, the power of storytelling revealed itself anew. Each narrative, a thread spun from regret and hope, intertwined with others to form a collective fabric of understanding. The conductor's enigmatic gaze swept over the group, his eyes reflecting the shifting tides of emotion within the carriage. Marcus felt the first real stirrings of forgiveness within him, a fragile bud pushing through the hardened soil of his past mistakes. Evelyn, inspired by Leela's quiet strength, embraced a growing courage to face the memories she had long avoided. Jonas, confronting his family's shadow, took tentative steps toward healing. The carriage was no longer just a vessel of solitary reflection. It had become a sanctuary of shared humanity. The echoes of forgiveness reverberated through the air, softening the edges of regret and lighting a path forward. As the night deepened, the passengers settled into a companionable silence, the kind that speaks of trust earned and fears gently laid to rest. Outside, the landscape blurred into a dreamscape of possibility, the lines between past and present growing ever more fluid, and somewhere deep within the train, the conductor's smile held a promise that the journey was far from over, but the hardest steps had begun. The next stop was not on any map. It was a place where the weight of regret might finally be lifted, where forgiveness could bloom amid the shadows. What awaited beyond the threshold was uncertain, but for the first time, hope was real. The Fable engine pressed onward, carrying its passengers toward the unknown, toward redemption, toward the stories yet to be told. The carriage lights flickered softly as a gentle breeze whispered through the open window, carrying with it the scent of rain and the faint rustle of leaves. Marcus closed his eyes, allowing the moment to settle over him. The path ahead was uncharted, the journey far from complete, but for now the burden felt lighter, and in that fragile light the passengers found the strength to dream again. The soft hum of the antique train's engine blended with the rhythmic clatter of wheels over rails. A steady heartbeat beneath the murmurs of the passengers gathered within the warmly lit carriage. Shadows from the flickering lanterns danced across the worn wooden panels, casting a surreal glow that seemed to suspend time itself. In this intimate setting, Clara Lynn cradled her small sketchbook in her lap, her delicate fingers tracing the worn edges as she prepared to share a story she had carried in silence. The others, Evelyn Hart, Marcus Wren, Jonas Gray, and a few more who had grown close in the shared voyage, listened in subtly, drawn by the quiet gravity Clara exuded. The train's surreal landscape shifted beyond the windows, the outside world melting into streaks of twilight blues and soft golds, a visual echo of the blurred lines between past and present, choice and consequence. Clara's voice emerged, soft yet unwavering, weaving her narrative with a gentle clarity. "I was a scientist once," she began, eyes distant but steady, on the brink of a breakthrough that could have changed everything. But when the choice came between the lab and family, chose the latter. She paused, the words hanging in the air like fragile glass. "Sometimes I wonder what might have been if I had stayed." The carriage fell into a hush, the weight of her confession settling over the group. Evelyn's gaze softened, her pen poised above the yellowed pages of her journal. She scribbled quietly, not wanting to miss a single nuance of Clara's story. The act of writing, for Evelyn, was more than mere record. Keeping it was a bridge, a way to process the tangled emotions the train stirred within her. Marcus shifted in his seat, his usual sardonic edge muted by the sincerity in Clara's words. Jonas, typically guarded and sharp-tongued, nodded thoughtfully, his frown easing into something resembling understanding. The train's interior seemed to pulse with a newfound openness. The passengers shared vulnerabilities, knitting them closer together. At the carriage's entrance, the conductor watched silently, his ageless eyes reflecting the smoky swirls that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the train. His presence was both comforting and unsettling, a reminder of the mysterious forces at play. Without speaking, he gestured slightly toward the window, where the surreal landscapes outside shifted and folded into one another, mirroring the fluidity of the passengers' inner journeys. Old Man Weaver, seated near the back, began to hum softly, the melody winding through the carriage like a thread of ancient magic. His voice soon rose in a mesmerizing cadence, spinning a tale that intertwined the regrets of each passenger into a mythic tapestry. The story wove seamlessly between past and present, reality and fantasy, illuminating the universal themes that bound them all. As the narrative unfolded, Evelyn felt a stirring within, a mixture of sorrow and hope, of longing and release. Clara's story had unlocked something in her, a door that had long remained closed. The train's journey was no longer just about confronting what was lost, but embracing the stories they carried as stepping stones toward healing. The conductor's cryptic presence lingered, a silent challenge hanging in the air, while the passengers were free to choose their paths. The interplay of fate and free will would continue to test their resolve. The tension between acceptance and change grew palpable, promising deeper revelations and trials in the chapters to come. As the carriage settled into a gentle sway, the passengers exchanged quiet glances, a tacit understanding passing between them. Their stories, once isolated and burdened, were now threads woven into a collective fabric, fragile yet resilient, sorrowful yet transformative. Evelyn closed her journal softly, the weight of the shared narratives pressing gently against her heart. Outside, the shifting landscapes whispered of untold possibilities, beckoning them onward into the unknown. The Fable engine pressed forward, carrying its passengers through the twilight of regret toward the dawning of acceptance and renewal, where the stories they carried might finally grant them the freedom to live anew. And as the train's wheels turned, so too did the pages of their lives, each chapter unfolding with the promise of discovery, forgiveness, and hope. The journey was far from over. "Clara, your choice, was it difficult?" Evelyn asked softly after the story's end, her voice barely above the train's gentle rumble. Clara smiled wistfully, eyes reflecting the flickering lantern light. "Every choice is difficult, Evelyn, but sometimes the heart chooses what the mind cannot fully understand." Marcus leaned forward, a rare seriousness softening his features. "Maybe that's the real story we're all trying to tell, the one where we find courage to live with those choices, no matter how heavy they feel." Jonas exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "And maybe, just maybe, we're not as alone in those stories as we think." The conductor's shadow passed briefly before the window, his presence a silent reminder that the train's journey was as much about the stories yet to be told as those already shared. Outside, the landscape folded again, seamless and strange, inviting them deeper into the mystery of what it meant to carry stories, to bear regrets, and ultimately to find release. The dim glow of the carriage lights flickered softly as Evelyn Hart closed her eyes, her breath steady but heart racing. The air around her shifted, rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond, and when she dared to open her eyes, she found herself standing in a sunlit kitchen, familiar yet altered. The scent of freshly baked bread, warm and inviting, wafted through the room, mingling with the faint melody of a jazz tune crackling from an old radio on the windowsill. Across the room, a young woman with bright eyes and a smile that tugged at Evelyn's soul was setting the table. Her daughter, not the distant, fractured memory she'd carried for years, but a living, breathing presence bathed in golden light. Evelyn's steps were hesitant, as if each one might shatter the fragile scene before her. The daughter looked up, catching Evelyn's gaze, and for a moment, time suspended itself between them. "Mom," she said softly, voice carrying the warmth of 1,000 unspoken apologies and hopes. Evelyn's throat tightened, tears blurring her vision, but she managed a smile, the first genuine one in years. As the moment stretched, Evelyn felt the weight of her regrets lift, replaced by something fragile but real, hope. This was not the life she had lived, but a glimpse of what might have been a fragment of redemption offered by the mysterious train's power. She lingered in the scene, absorbing the bittersweet peace before the shimmering veil pulled her back to the carriage, heart pounding with renewed resolve. Elsewhere in the train, Marcus Wren stood leaning against a rain-speckled window. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was a steady drumbeat to his swirling thoughts. Usually, he masked his pain with sharp wit and a sardonic smile, but tonight, those defenses felt thin, fragile. His mind drifted to a life where he had chosen vulnerability over cynicism, where love had not been a battlefield, but a refuge. The blurred landscape outside mirrored his uncertainty, but beneath the surface, a small spark of fragile optimism flickered. "It's not weakness," he whispered to the shadows. "It's a chance." The carriage door slid open, and Clara Lynn stepped in, her delicate features illuminated by the dim light. She carried her ever-present sketchbook, though tonight her eyes held a softness that mirrored Marcus's newfound openness. "Sometimes," Clara said quietly, "we have to let the story change." Marcus nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. In the shadows of another compartment, Jonas Gray sat rigid, the ghost of a bitter memory haunting him. The cold, metallic walls seemed to close in as he replayed the harsh words exchanged with his lost sibling, the silence between them a chasm he'd tried to ignore. The flickering light from a lantern cast long shadows that danced on the walls, echoing the turmoil within. But then Clara's voice, gentle and unwavering, broke through the silence. "You're not alone in this," she said, taking a seat beside him. "We all carry wounds, Jonas. It's what we do with them that counts." Jonas's perpetual frown softened, and for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a path beyond the bitterness. The breakthrough rippled through the group, shifting the emotional tone from despair to tentative hope. Between the carriages, on the narrow platform bathed in the ghostly light of the train's lanterns, the conductor appeared. His vintage uniform was immaculate, but his eyes ever-shifting like smoke held the weight of countless timelines. His enigmatic smile was both a challenge and a comfort, a reminder that the journey was far from over. The train thrummed with unseen energy, the boundary between realities thinning, inviting the passengers deeper into the realm of choice and consequence. As the night deepened, the passengers found themselves bound not only by the shared experience of regret, but by the possibility of redemption. Evelyn's heart, once heavy with guilt, now carried a fragile peace. Marcus's cynicism yielded to a cautious hopefulness. Jonas's guarded nature softened, opening the door to healing. The train, ever enigmatic, seemed to pulse with the collective heartbeat of its passengers, each fragment of their stories weaving a tapestry of sorrow and salvation. The journey ahead promised more revelations, more confrontations with the self. But for now, the fragments of redemption shimmered brightly, a testament to the human capacity to find light even in the darkest of alternate timelines. As the Fable engine hurtled forward through the night, the passengers braced themselves for the crossings yet to come, hearts alight with the bittersweet hope that perhaps, in the realm of stories, some regrets could be transformed into grace. The Fable engine hummed with a peculiar energy as it neared the metaphysical crossing. Outside, the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of shifting hues and impossible forms. the familiar landscapes twisting into something both alien and intimately known. Inside the train, the air was heavy with a charged stillness, as if each passenger could feel the very fabric of time bending around them. Evelyn Hart sat quietly in her carriage, the worn journal resting unopened on her lap. The pages, filled with spidery handwriting and tentative sketches, had been her faithful companion throughout the journey. Yet now, as the train approached the crossing, she found herself unable to write. Her gaze was fixed on the window, where the surreal horizon stretched endlessly, a blur of deep indigos merging with fiery crimsons. The weight of years pressed upon her chest, a familiar ache of guilt and regret. She thought of the daughter she had left behind, the fractured bond that had haunted her dreams. But here, in this liminal space between realities, Evelyn felt something shift within herself, stirring of quiet determination. The voices of her alternate selves whispered through her mind, not as accusations, but as echoes of possibility. Nearby, Marcus Wren paced the narrow aisle, his usual restless energy tempered by the gravity of the moment. His tousled blonde hair caught the dim light, and the sharp lines of his jaw seemed softer, less guarded. He stopped beside Clara Lynn, whose delicate features were illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern overhead. The small sketchbook she carried lay forgotten on her lap as she looked up at him with gentle, expectant eyes. For a long moment, Marcus said nothing, the armor of charm and cynicism slipping away. Then his voice broke, low and hesitant. "I'm afraid," he admitted, the admission raw and unpolished, "not of the regrets, but of what they mean about me, about what I never dared to face." Clara reached out, her hand steady and warm against his. "Fear doesn't make you weak," she whispered. "It makes you human." Across the carriage, Jonas Gray sat rigid, his perpetual frown deepening as he watched the exchange. The bitter walls he had built around himself trembled slightly. The confrontation with his own regrets nearing its inevitable breaking point. Suddenly, the conductor materialized in the aisle, as if summoned by the very tension in the air. His vintage uniform was immaculate, yet his eyes held the shifting smoke of eternity neither wholly present nor entirely otherworldly. His voice was calm, yet carried the weight of inevitability. "Time does not wait," he intoned, "and neither does this journey. The crossing ahead is not merely a passage of distance, but of choice and consequence." The passengers fell silent, each feeling the full measure of his words. For Evelyn, it was a summons to bravery, the courage to embrace the past not as a chain, but as a mosaic of lessons. For Marcus, it was a challenge to shed the last vestiges of his cynicism and open himself to vulnerability. For Jonas and Clara, it was a reminder that healing demanded confrontation as well as compassion. As the train surged forward, the boundaries between timelines thinned. Memories bled into present moments. Whispers of alternate lives brushed against the edges of consciousness. The surreal landscape outside mirrored this fusion trees shimmered with spectral light, and the air vibrated with a haunting melody that seemed both sorrowful and hopeful. Evelyn closed her eyes, allowing herself to breathe in the shifting air. She pictured her daughter's face, not as a source of pain, but as a beacon of what might yet be. The journal in her lap felt warm, a tangible connection to the stories that had carried her here. Marcus squeezed Clara's hand, his smile tentative but genuine. "Maybe it's time I stopped running," he murmured. The conductor's gaze swept over them all, a fleeting smile touching his lips. "Acceptance is not surrender," he said softly. "It is the beginning of freedom." The train crossed the metaphysical divide with a shudder that rippled through every carriage. Time stretched and folded, and the passengers stood on the threshold of transformation, suspended between what was, what is, and what might be. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, hope glimmered amid the shadows of regret. And as the Fable engine pressed onward into the unknown, its passengers braced themselves for the revelations yet to come. The carriage was awash in a muted glow, the dim light filtering through stained glass windows, casting fractured patterns upon the worn upholstery. The air was thick with unspoken burdens, the weight of countless regrets pressing down on the passengers like an invisible shroud. Jonas Gray sat rigidly in his seat, his tall frame hunched over as if trying to make himself smaller, less present. His perpetual frown deepened, furrowing his brow as memories clawed their way to the surface, relentless in their demand for recognition. For a long moment, the carriage was silent, except for the faint patter of rain against the window panes and the distant rumble of the train's wheels on the tracks. Then Jonas's voice broke the stillness, uneven and raw, carrying the sharp edge of years-long repression. "I never told anyone. Not really," he began, voice catching. "My brother, he was everything to me. And I was there, but I wasn't. I walked away when he needed me most." His hands trembled, the skin taut over knuckles that clenched and unclenched as the floodgates opened. Tears traced unsteady paths down his cheeks, silver trails shining in the carriage's dim glow. Other passengers turned their eyes toward him, the collective breath held in a fragile pause. Evelyn Hart, sitting a few seats away, felt the familiar ache of guilt resonate in her chest, a mirror to Jonas's pain. Clara Lynn, ever gentle and nurturing, slid quietly beside Jonas, her delicate fingers resting lightly on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm against the rawness of his confession. "We all carry weights we wish we could shed, but here you don't have to carry it alone." The scent of aged wood mingled with the faint aroma of rain and the subtle musk of worn leather, grounding the moment in tangible reality even as the boundaries between timelines and memories blurred. Clara's presence was a quiet anchor, offering solace without pressing too hard, allowing the pain to breathe but not to consume. Across the carriage, Marcus Wren observed the scene with a rare softness in his eyes. His usual sardonic humor was absent, replaced by a contemplative quiet that reflected his own struggles with vulnerability. Evelyn caught his gaze and gave a small, understanding nod. It was a silent acknowledgement that they were all entwined in this intricate dance of regret and redemption. Evelyn pulled her worn journal into her lap, the familiar texture of the leather cover grounding her amid the swirling emotions. She lifted her pen to the page, the nib scratching softly as she began to write. Her thoughts crystallized around the theme that had haunted her since boarding the Fable engine, the burden of what remains when regret is faced head-on. "Regret is not a chain," she wrote, "but a shadow sometimes long, sometimes faint that follows us, shaping the contours of who we are. It is the echo of choices made and unmade, the weight of roads not taken. Yet within this weight lies the possibility of transformation, if only we dare to confront the darkness and let it illuminate the path forward." Outside, the surreal landscape shifted subtly, the rain blurring the edges of reality as the train pressed onward through time's fluid corridors. The conductor stood silently at the carriage door, his figure an ageless sentinel cloaked in the vintage uniform of another era. His eyes, shifting like smoke, reflected the flickering candlelight, embodying the relentless passage of time and the inevitability of reckoning with regret. He said nothing, but his presence was palpable, a reminder that the passenger's journey was as much internal as it was physical. The tension between longing for what might have been and the necessity of acceptance hung heavy in the air, a bittersweet melody playing softly beneath the hum of the train. Jonas's sobs softened, replaced by a weary stillness that spoke of release and exhaustion. Clara remained by his side, her steady calm a beacon in the storm. Evelyn closed her journal, her eyes meeting those of Marcus and Jonas in a shared moment of understanding. They were no longer isolated by their regrets, but connected through the collective act of facing them. The carriage seemed to breathe with them, the oppressive weight easing just enough to allow a fragile hope to take root. Yet the journey was far from over. The conductor's gaze lingered, a silent challenge, an invitation to step fully into the unknown. As the train rattled onward into the night, the passengers sat, surrounded by shadows and light, each wrestling with what remained and what could still be. The burden of regret was heavy, but within it lay the seed of renewal, a promise whispered on the rails of the Fable engine. And just as the carriage door creaked open to reveal the next passage, Evelyn's voice, barely more than a whisper, broke the quiet. What if letting go is not forgetting, but finally making peace? The question hung in the air, unanswered but alive, as the train surged forward into the uncertain dawn. The lounge car of the Fable engine was bathed in a soft amber glow, the flickering light of a solitary lantern casting long shadows across the worn velvet seats and polished wood paneling. Old Man Weaver, the train's venerable storyteller, settled into his customary spot near the window, the edges of his silver hair catching the light like a halo. His eyes, sharp and luminous despite his age, scanned the gathered passengers, each face etched with the weight of their individual regrets, yet softened now by the shared experience of this ethereal journey. A hush fell over the compartment as Old Man Weaver began his tale, his voice a textured murmur that seemed to rise and fall with the gentle sway of the train. He spoke of a distant village where the inhabitants lived with their regrets, woven into the very fabric of their lives, threads of sorrow, hope, and redemption intertwined in a tapestry that no one dared unravel alone. His words painted scenes of lost loves rekindled, chances grasped too late, and the quiet courage found in forgiveness. The passengers listened intently, their own stories resonating within the folds of the narrative. Evelyn Hart, seated a few seats away, clutched her worn journal, its pages filled with fragments of her own alternate timelines. She felt a stirring deep within, a fragile bloom of hope unfurling amid the shadows of her guilt. Across the car, Marcus Wren leaned forward, his usual cynicism softened by the unexpected warmth of shared vulnerability. The stories Old Man Weaver told did more than entertain. They mirrored the passengers' innermost fears and desires, inviting them to see their regrets not as chains but as keys to understanding. Evelyn caught Marcus's glance and offered a tentative smile, the first genuine one since the journey began. The soft rustle of her journal's pages was a quiet counterpoint to the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels, a soothing cadence that seemed to bind the travelers together in a fragile fellowship. They began to share snippets of their journeys, voices low and earnest, weaving their experiences into the larger narrative tapestry that Old Man Weaver had begun. Marcus's humor surfaced gently, no longer a shield but a bridge, and Evelyn's reflective insights illuminated corners of her soul she had long kept hidden. At the far end of the car, the conductor stood silently, his presence a subtle but potent force. Clad in his vintage uniform, his eyes shifting like smoke in the dim light, he watched the unfolding scene with an inscrutable expression. His role was neither judge nor villain, but a guide through the liminal spaces between choice and consequence. His enigmatic smile suggested both approval and the knowledge that the journey was far from over. Outside, the landscape flowed like a watercolor dream, hues blending and shifting beyond the window pane. Trees and rivers shimmered in surreal tones, blurring the lines between reality and story, past and present. The passengers watched in quiet awe, sensing that their shared narratives were transforming the very fabric of the train itself. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth, mingling with the faint aroma of aged paper and wood polish inside the car. Clara Lynn, seated near Evelyn, quietly sketched the shifting scenery in her small notebook, the delicate lines capturing the ephemeral beauty of the moment. Jonas Gray, usually guarded and skeptical, softened as he listened, the hard edges of his demeanor giving way to a tentative acceptance. The collective heartbeats of the passengers quickened, synchronized by the unfolding possibility of redemption. Old Man Weaver's tale reached a crescendo, the villagers in his story confronting their regrets not with anger or despair but with open hearts and shared stories. The passengers felt a ripple of that courage pass through the car, a silent encouragement to embrace their own journeys with newfound strength. Evelyn closed her journal gently, her eyes meeting Marcus's in a moment of quiet understanding. They were no longer alone in their regrets. Their stories, once isolated and painful, had become threads woven into a shared tapestry of healing. The conductor's voice, when he finally spoke, was low and measured. Stories are not just echoes of what has been. They are the maps we follow toward what might yet be. To accept one's past is to unlock the door to freedom. His words lingered in the charged air, a benediction and a challenge. As the train pressed onward through the shifting landscapes, the passengers sat in thoughtful silence, the power of storytelling illuminating the path ahead. The journey was far from over, but in this moment, hope had taken root. The Fable engine was not merely a vessel for regret. It was a crucible of transformation, where sorrow could be alchemized into understanding, and the stories they carried could become the keys to their salvation. Evelyn's journal, once a repository of pain, now felt like a testament to resilience. Marcus's guarded smile hinted at the possibility of forgiveness, both of others and himself. The conductor's figure at the window seemed less a harbinger of judgment and more a guardian of passage. An old man Weaver, the keeper of tales, continued to weave his narratives, each one a thread connecting the passengers not only to their pasts but to a future shaped by acceptance and hope. The lantern's light flickered, casting dancing shadows as the train carried them deeper into the night and into the stories yet to be told. The carriage was filled with a hushed stillness that felt almost sacred, as if the train itself was holding its breath. Outside the window, the landscape had settled into an ethereal twilight, the shifting hues of dusk painting the world in soft purples and blues that blurred the boundary between reality and dream. Evelyn Hart sat quietly by the window, her journal lying open on her lap, the pen resting idle against the worn pages. Her eyes traced the shadows dancing on the glass, each flicker carrying the weight of memories and the anticipation of what was to come. Around her, the other passengers had also settled into a reflective calm. The journey had worn on them, peeling back layers of regret and revealing raw, vulnerable truths. Yet in this moment, there was an unspoken solidarity, a shared understanding that transcended words. The train's gentle, rhythmic hum was a constant companion, a lullaby for souls poised on the brink of transformation. Lila, the youngest among them, sat cross-legged on the floor near the carriage's center, her small sketchbook balanced delicately in her hands. She hummed softly, a simple, haunting melody that seemed to weave through the heavy air and lighten it. Her innocence was a balm, a reminder of hope untouched by the past's burdens. Her bright eyes occasionally lifted toward Evelyn, a silent offering of comfort and courage. Clara Lynn, ever gentle and nurturing, leaned slightly toward Marcus Wren, as they sat together by a flickering lantern that cast dancing shadows onto the wooden panels. Their conversation was low, hesitant, but sincere. Marcus's usual charm was subdued, replaced by a quiet openness that surprised even him. Clara's delicate features softened as she listened, her sketchbook resting forgotten at her side. They spoke not just of regrets, but of possibilities of forgiveness, of new beginnings. At the far end of the carriage, the conductor stood with the grace of a timeless sentinel. His vintage uniform, immaculate and slightly worn at the edges, shimmered faintly in the dim light. His eyes, shifting and smoky like tendrils of mist, found Evelyn's across the carriage. A slow, enigmatic smile curved his lips, neither wholly comforting nor threatening, but filled with profound meaning. It was a silent promise of challenge and mercy intertwined, a quiet herald of the journey's next stage. Evelyn's heart quickened as she met that gaze. The weight of regret that had hobbled her for so long seemed to loosen its grip, replaced by a fragile but growing courage. She reached into her bag and drew out a slender pen, fingers trembling slightly as she began to write a few words in her journal, words not of sorrow, but of resolve. The passengers' reflections had deepened their understanding of themselves and one another. The train, a vessel of time and memory, had brought them to this shared crossroads. Here, in this quiet before the threshold, they found solace not in forgetting their past, but in embracing its flaws, failures, and all. As the train's wheels began to quicken their steady rhythm, a subtle shift filled the air. The metaphysical threshold was near, a place where the fabric of reality would thin and the alternate versions of their lives would stand unveiled. The conductor's smile lingered, a reminder that what lay ahead was both an ending and a beginning. Evelyn closed her journal gently, the ink still fresh with the promise of acceptance. She took a deep breath, feeling the steady pulse of the train beneath her, and allowed herself a final glance around the carriage. The faces of those who had become more than mere passengers' companions on this strange and luminous journey were quiet but resolute. Outside, the twilight deepened, and the gentle hum of the engine grew into a steady call to courage. The quiet before the threshold was a moment suspended in time, a fragile pause where hope blossomed amid shadows. And in that stillness, Evelyn knew she was ready to step forward into whatever awaited beyond. The carriage lights flickered softly, casting long shadows that stretched and intertwined like the stories that bound them all together. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the threshold awaited an unseen door opening onto the final act of their journey. And as the train surged forward, propelled by the relentless passage of time and choice, the passengers braced themselves to confront the truths that had long haunted their souls. In that quiet, expectant moment, the endless possibilities of the roads not taken shimmered faintly like stars just beyond reach. The Fable engine held its breath, and so did they. The journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. The moment the Fable engine began to cross the shimmering threshold, the air inside the carriages thickened with an almost tangible magic. The familiar clatter of wheels against rails faded into a gentle hum, a sound like a heartbeat syncing with the pulse of the universe itself. Outside, the landscape melted into a blur of colors, deep blues melted into fiery oranges, and the sky above twisted into shifting ribbons of light. Passengers, seated quietly or standing by the windows, felt themselves caught in a strange limbo, as if the boundaries of time and space were dissolving around them. Evelyn Hart's gaze was fixed on the window, but the reflection staring back was not quite her own. The silver threads in her dark hair seemed to shimmer more brightly, and her eyes held a deeper light, sharper clarity born of confronting the impossible. The conductor appeared beside her, his figure as steady and enigmatic as ever, eyes swirling like smoke in the dim light. "We're crossing into the blur," he said softly, voice like the rustle of aged paper. "Here, time is no longer linear. Truths emerge unbidden." Evelyn nodded, swallowing a lump of both dread and anticipation. She glanced around the carriage. Marcus Wren leaned against the wall, his usual bravado stripped away, exposing raw nerves beneath. Jonas Gray sat alone, fists clenched, his face a mask of both defiance and sorrow. The train slowed, then seemed to dissolve into a swirl of mist and light. Passengers found themselves untethered, floating in a space where memories and possibilities collided. Evelyn's surroundings shifted into a delicate, translucent cena room bathed in soft afternoon light, where a younger version of herself sat across from a small girl with bright eyes. It was the daughter she had left behind, the daughter she had carried in memories and regrets for so long. Their eyes met. No words were spoken, but the silence between them was charged with everything left unsaid. Love, pain, forgiveness, and longing. Evelyn felt tears prickle at the corners of her eyes. This was a moment suspended beyond time, a chance to face the road not taken. Nearby, Marcus found himself surrounded by a chorus of laughter and whispers echoes of a life where he had not walked away from his engagement. His rugged charm faded as he saw himself vulnerable, afraid, and yearning for connection. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to weep openly, the laughter mixing with tears in a cathartic release. He was not the cynical man he had been. He was someone capable of hope. Jonas sat beside a faint, flickering image of his lost sibling. The grief that had shadowed his life softened as he reached out, fingertips brushing against the memory. The conductor stood behind him, silent and watchful. Jonas closed his eyes, allowing peace to settle within him like a gentle tide. The train's hum grew louder, drawing the passengers back from the blur. Each carried a newfound clarity, a fragile hope born of their encounters with their deepest regrets and alternate selves. Evelyn clutched her journal, the pages warm with fresh ink and possibility. As the mist receded and the carriages solidified once more, the conductor's eyes met hers. "The journey through the blur reveals what lies beneath the surface," he said, voice both comforting and mysterious. "What will you do with what you have seen?" Evelyn met his gaze, feeling the weight of choice settle within her. The train was no longer just a vessel of stories. It was a crucible of transformation. Outside, the rails stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering in gritty noir lighting, the watercolor hues blending surrealism with stark reality. The Fable engine surged forward, carrying its passengers beyond the borders of regret, toward a horizon where acceptance and hope intertwined. And as the train moved, the stories of those aboard wove tighter threads in a tapestry of sorrow and redemption. Each heartbeat of the engine echoed the timeless question, what if? And beyond that, the more profound answer, what now? The journey through the blur had changed everything. But the story was far from over. The carriage was quiet, save for the soft rhythm of rain against the window pane, a muted percussion that felt like the heartbeat of the train itself. Evelyn Hart sat with her journal open across her lap, fingers trembling slightly as she lifted her pen. The words she was about to write were not meant for any audience, certainly not for the other passengers who drifted through the dimly lit carriages, nor for the enigmatic conductor whose presence seemed to hover just beyond sight. They were meant for her daughter, a letter she would never send, a confession and a plea folded into one. Her eyes, reflective pools of thought and regret, traced the fading ink of previous entries before she began anew. "My dearest, I carry you with me, even in the silence, she wrote, her voice almost audible in the stillness. There are roads I never took, choices I feared to make, and in that hesitation, I lost the chance to be the mother I wanted to be. Forgive me, if you can. Forgive me, if you must. The words were heavy but freeing, each sentence a small chisel breaking away the stone of her guilt. In the adjoining corridor, Marcus Wren leaned against the window, the landscape outside melting into surreal shapes and colors, mirroring the shifting terrain of his own heart. His tousled blonde hair caught the low light as he exhaled slowly, the usual mask of sarcasm and charm momentarily slipping away. "I'm sorry," he murmured to the empty air, a whispered apology to the versions of himself scattered across countless timelines. For the walls I built, for the love I left behind. It was a surrender, not to defeat, but to the possibility of healing. Something fragile and new was taking root beneath the cynicism. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner, Clara Lynn closed her sketchbook with deliberate care and reached out to touch Jonas Gray's arm. Jonas, tall and perpetually guarded, stared out into the shifting shadows, his face a mask of skepticism and pain. The touch was tentative, but deliberate, a gesture of empathy that breached the distance he had maintained since boarding. For a brief moment, his frown softened, the lines around his eyes loosening as if the weight he bore had lifted just a fraction. It was a small victory, but a profound one in a space where connection was the first step toward redemption. The atmosphere within the Fable engine itself began to change. The oppressive heaviness that had clung to the ear, the weight of unspoken regrets and unseen tears, began to lift as passengers gathered in small clusters, sharing stories, laughter, and tears in equal measure. The lanterns lining the aisles flickered gently, casting a warm glow that softened the shadows and invited vulnerability. The conductor watched from a distance, his eyes shifting like smoke, reflecting the flickering light as he silently observed the transformation underway. Evelyn's act of confronting her guilt had set a ripple through the group. It was as though the very walls of the train absorbed the courage she summoned, encouraging others to lay down their burdens, if only for a moment. Marcus's vulnerability invited others to shed their armor, while Clara and Jonas's tentative connection created a sanctuary amid the swirling tide of emotions. "It's not easy," Evelyn said softly during a gathering in one of the larger carriages, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means acknowledging the pain and choosing not to let it define us anymore." Marcus nodded, a rare seriousness in his gaze. "I spent so long running from who I was, afraid to admit I was broken. But maybe breaking open is how we heal." Jonas's voice, usually sharp and guarded, was quieter now, touched with something almost like hope. "Maybe the past doesn't have to be a prison. Maybe it can be a foundation." Clara smiled gently, her eyes bright. "We all carry stories within us, stories that hurt, but also stories that can save us if we let them." As the train rolled onward through the shifting dreamscape of parallel timelines, the passengers embraced the fragile liberation they had found. The weight of their regrets remained, but it no longer crushed them. Instead, it became a shared burden, lightened by empathy and understanding. Outside, the rain softened into a gentle mist, blurring the edges of the world as if inviting the passengers to see beyond the limits of their pasts. Inside, the lanterns flickered once more, casting long shadows that danced like memories, sometimes painful, sometimes beautiful, always part of the journey. And somewhere in the distance, the conductor's silhouette lingered, a reminder that the path to healing was ongoing, that the stories we tell ourselves have the power not just to bind us, but to set us free. But even as hope wove its quiet thread through the carriages, a question lingered in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Could they truly let go of their regrets without losing the very parts of themselves those regrets had forged? The answer remained as elusive as the shifting light, waiting to be discovered in the chapters yet to come. The carriage was a cocoon of muted colors and soft murmurs, the steady rhythmic clatter of the antique train wheels against the rails a constant backdrop. Evelyn Hart sat by the window, her journal resting on her lap, the edges of the worn paper catching droplets of rain that traced silver lines down the glass. Outside, the landscape blurred into an impressionist painting hazy trees, fragmented skies, and shifting shadows that seemed to echo the fluidity of the passengers' intertwined stories. She traced a pen lightly across the page, her thoughts weaving between the words she had written and the conversations held in the dimly lit lounge car just moments before. Acceptance. She had written acceptance, not as surrender, but as a delicate, breathing thing. It was a thread that had begun to unravel the tight knots of her guilt, loosening the grip of the past she'd carried like a heavy cloak. Across the cabin, Marcus Wren leaned against the polished wooden railing, his casual posture belying the tension etched into his sharp jawline. The fading light cast long, wavering shadows over his tousled blonde hair. His voice, usually quick with sarcasm and deflection, had softened, revealing cracks in his armor. "I've spent so long weaving bitterness into my story that I forgot what it felt like to hope," he confessed. Eyes momentarily meeting Evelyn's with a raw honesty that unsettled yet invited connection. Clara Lynn sat nearby, her delicate features framed by the soft glow of a vintage lamp. She held her small sketchbook loosely, the pages fluttering as if stirred by an unseen breeze. Her presence was a bomb-gentle nurturing, and, when she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of quiet understanding. "Maybe it's not about erasing the regrets," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "but about weaving them into a tapestry that includes forgiveness and growth." Jonas Gray, ever the skeptic, stood a little apart, his tall frame silhouetted against the window. The perpetual frown creased his face, but tonight there was a softness, a tentative lifting of the barriers he had so carefully constructed. The bitter family secrets that had shadowed his narrative were no longer claws clutching at his soul, but threads in the complex fabric of his being. Threads he was beginning to acknowledge rather than deny. The conductor emerged from the shadows, his ageless figure framed by the flickering antique lamps. His uniform was impeccable, yet his eyes shimmered with an otherworldly smoke-like swirl that seemed to hold the weight of countless journeys. He moved with a grace that was both unsettling and comforting, and as he addressed the passengers, his voice was a low, resonant murmur that filled the room. "Redemption is not a destination, but a journey across unseen paths," he intoned, his gaze sweeping over each traveler. "You have glimpsed what might have been, and in doing so, you have begun the true work, to weave your regrets into the lives you choose to lead. This train is a vessel, but the course is yours." The passengers exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, a burgeoning hope that had been absent for far too long. She closed her journal gently, the pages now a testament to growth and possibility rather than sorrow and loss. Gathering together, the passengers formed a circle in the lounge car, their voices rising and falling in a tapestry of stories and confessions. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and rain, mingling with the palpable sense of healing. Each narrative was a thread, weaving a collective fabric of redemption and resilience. Marcus's laughter broke through the solemnity, lighter now, tinged with genuine amusement rather than cynicism. Maybe there's a future where I'm not just running from my past, he said, the words carrying a tentative promise. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with quiet determination. And maybe that future is already beginning. Evelyn met Marcus's gaze, a silent pact forming between them, a shared commitment to embracing the unknown with courage. As the train hummed steadily onward through the shifting landscapes of time and memory, the conductor watched from the periphery, a faint smile playing on his lips. The journey was far from over, but the threads of redemption had begun to bind the passengers in ways that transcended regret. Outside, the rain softened to a mist, blurring the edges of the world and inviting the possibility of new beginnings. Inside, the stories continued, each one a step toward healing, each word a stitch in the fabric of hope. And as the Fable engine carried them forward, the passengers realized that the true power of the train was not in altering the past, but in transforming the present through the stories they dared to tell and believe. The night deepened around them, but within the carriage, a quiet light burned, steady and unwavering. The journey toward redemption had taken its first fragile steps, and with it, the promise of tomorrow. Yet, as the train surged toward the metaphysical threshold ahead, an unspoken question lingered in the air. How far would they go to embrace the lives waiting beyond the roads not taken? The answer, as always, lay just beyond the bend, where time and choice entwined in their endless dance. The carriage was washed in a dim amber glow, the flicker of the lantern casting dancing shadows against the worn wood paneling. Old Man Weaver settled into his usual nook, the creak of his chair echoing softly as he cleared his throat. The passengers, gathered in loose clusters, hushed instinctively. Evelyn's pen hovered briefly over the page of her journal before she began to write again, her eyes reflecting the gentle light. Around her, faces were attentive. Marcus, with his habitual edge softened. Clara's delicate features serene, Jonas's guarded expression unusually open. The air was thick with unspoken stories, the kind that clawed quietly beneath the surface, waiting for a voice. Old Man Weaver began his tale, his voice low and textured like a thread weaving through time itself. He spoke of a traveler who crossed many roads, each path a shimmering thread in the tapestry of possibility. Every choice, he intoned, is a story waiting to be told, a life waiting to be lived. But the stories we tell ourselves, those are the ones that shape our souls. Evelyn's pen scratched the paper softly, capturing fragments of the narrative, but more so, the emotions it stirred within her. Her journey, once heavy with the ache of abandoned chances, now shimmered with tentative hope. Each word she inscribed was a stitch in the fabric of acceptance she was beginning to weave. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, the usual bravado slipping away as he recounted a memory from the timeline where he never ended his engagement. His voice betrayed a vulnerability he rarely showed, and the eyes around him softened in response. Clara offered a quiet nod, her sketchbook forgotten on her lap, while Jonas, ever the skeptic, allowed a faint smile to tug at the corners of his mouth. In that moment, the barriers between them thinned, and the shared weight of regret was transformed into a collective strength. Outside, the rain began to fall a gentle patter against the antique train's windows, rhythmically marking the passage of time. The sound mingled with whispered stories, the subtle creak of the carriage, and the soft murmur of voices finding courage. The train itself seemed to breathe, alive with the hopes and sorrows of its passengers, carrying them toward the unknown threshold ahead. Evelyn closed her journal gently, a sense of peace settling deep within her. She glanced around at the faces illuminated by the lantern, light each etched with their own histories, their own roads not taken. The stories they told themselves were no longer chains but wings, lifting them beyond regret. "Tell me," Old Man Weaver's voice broke the silence, "what story will you choose to live?" The question hung in the air, a challenge and an invitation. As the train moved steadily forward, the passengers understood that their journey was as much about the stories they carried within as the alternate lives they glimpsed. In the weaving of narrative and memory, they found not just sorrow, but a path to healing, testament to the enduring power of storytelling. And as the night deepened, so too did their resolve. Each passenger ready to face the stories yet unwritten, the roads yet to be traveled, and the futures forged by the tales they dared to tell. The lantern flickered once more, then steadied as the Fable engine pressed onward into the shifting mists of time. The Fable engine hummed with a gentler pulse that evening, its ancient wheels turning steadily as the twilight deepened outside the windows. Inside one of the softly lit carriages, the atmosphere was markedly different from the tense, charged energy that had characterized much of the journey thus far. Here, a quiet calm reigned, a subtle shift born not from the landscape but from the transformations slowly settling within the passengers themselves. Evelyn Hart sat near the window, her silver-streaked dark hair catching the warm glow of the carriage lamp. Her thoughtful eyes, usually so guarded and reflective, now held a softness born of tentative peace. Beside her, Marcus Wren lounged with a casual ease that belied the turmoil he had wrestled with in earlier hours. His tousled blonde hair fell over his forehead as he smiled gently, a hint of vulnerability breaking through the usual cynicism that wrapped around him like armor. Clara Lynn, sitting opposite them, cradled her small sketchbook in her lap, fingers lightly tracing its worn edges. Her delicate features were serene, her eyes bright with the quiet satisfaction of connection. The three of them shared stories in low voices, their conversations weaving a tapestry of reflection, hope, and understanding. It was a rare moment of intimacy, a break in the relentless flow of regret and revelation that had driven the train's journey. "It's strange," Clara murmured, glancing out at the shifting landscape beyond the window. "How even the smallest choices can ripple through our lives in ways we never imagine." Evelyn nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of her journal resting on her knees. "And yet, here we are, finding some kind of peace in the stories we once feared to tell." Marcus chuckled softly, the sound warm and genuine. "I never thought I'd say it, but there's something freeing in letting go, not just of the past, but of the bitterness that clings to it." Their words floated in the carriage air, mingling with the gentle rocking of the train and the distant hum of the tracks. Outside, twilight painted the sky in deep indigo and soft gold, the surreal landscape a mirror to the passengers' internal states, a blend of melancholy and hope. Across the carriage, Jonas Gray leaned lightly against the window, his usual perpetual frown softened by a tentative smile. The tall man's sharp features, often marked by cynicism and guardedness, now reflected a rare moment of vulnerability. He listened intently to the trio's conversation, the walls around him slowly crumbling as the shared experience of the journey drew them together. "I never thought I'd say this," Jonas admitted quietly, "but there's something about this place, the stories, the people that's begun to change how I see my own past." Evelyn glanced toward him, offering a small, encouraging smile. "We're all learning to face what we thought we couldn't." The subtle sound of footsteps approached, and the carriage door creaked open. The conductor appeared, his ageless figure cloaked in the vintage uniform, eyes shifting like smoke, yet less foreboding than before. He paused, his enigmatic smile conveying something between approval and reassurance. "You've all come far," he said softly, voice a gentle echo in the quiet carriage. The journey back is as important as the one forward. With that, he vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared, leaving behind a lingering sense of calm and purpose. The passengers exchanged looks, the weight of their shared experiences settling into a comfortable silence. The train's gentle rhythm seemed to echo their newfound serenity, a lullaby for healing souls navigating the blurred lines between regret and acceptance. As the night deepened, Evelyn opened her journal and began to write, her pen moving steadily across the pages. Each word was a step toward understanding, each sentence a bridge between sorrow and hope. Around her, the others found their own ways to integrate the revelations they carried. Marcus, with a quiet smile, Clara sketching delicate lines that captured the essence of their journey, Jonas allowing himself moments of reflection free from cynicism. The glow of the carriage lamp flickered softly, casting shadows that danced like memories on the walls. Outside, the train glided through a world suspended between reality and dream, the surreal twilight landscape a testament to the passengers' inner transformations. In this calm after the storm, the passengers of the Fable engine found not only respite, but the strength to face what lay ahead. Bonds forged in shared vulnerability and empathy now formed the foundation upon which their futures might be rebuilt. The journey was far from over, but in this moment, surrounded by kindred souls and the gentle hum of the train, hope blossomed quietly, an ember glowing steadily against the encroaching night. And just beyond the horizon, the tracks stretched onward, winding toward unknown destinations, carrying with them the stories of those brave enough to confront the roads not taken. The story was not finished. It was only beginning anew. The rhythmic clatter of wheels against the worn tracks filled the carriage with a persistent heartbeat, steady and unyielding as the Fable engine traced its path back toward the forgotten rail yard. Outside, the landscape bore the muted hues of dusk, trees casting long shadows over fields that seemed both familiar and subtly changed, as though the journey itself had shifted the very fabric of the world around them. Inside the carriage, a tranquil stillness hung in the air, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions each passenger carried within. Evelyn Hart sat by the window, her hands folded gently in her lap atop the well-worn journal that had accompanied her from the moment she boarded the train. The leather cover, softened by years of use, bore the imprint of countless thoughts and confessions, its pages a testament to the journey she had undertaken, not just through the train's carriages, but through the labyrinth of her own regrets and hopes. Her dark eyes, flecked with silver strands of hair framing her thoughtful face, traced the passing scenery with a contemplative calm. The weight of guilt that had once pressed heavily upon her chest now felt tempered by a fragile peace, as if the stories she had lived and witnessed aboard the train had woven a new understanding within her. Across the carriage, Marcus Wren leaned casually against the polished wooden paneling, his tousled blonde hair catching the soft glow of the lantern light. The sharp angles of his jaw, usually set in a smirk or guarded expression, softened as he exchanged quiet words with Clara Lynn, whose delicate features bore the serene kindness that had become a balm for many aboard the train. Their conversation, low and intimate amidst the ambient hum of the train's steady movement, was a rare unveiling of vulnerability from Marcosa, tentative step away from the cynicism that had so long defined him. Clara's small sketchbook lay open on her lap, though her hand rested idle, the pencil forgotten as she listened to Marcus's voice, stripped of its usual deflections. Their exchange was not merely a moment of connection, but a subtle transformation, a bridge built from shared stories and newfound understanding. Elsewhere, Jonas Gray occupied a corner of the carriage, his tall frame hunched slightly as he stared into the dimming light outside. The perpetual frown that seemed etched into his features was less pronounced now, the harsh edges of bitterness giving way to a tentative acceptance. His confrontation with family trauma, once a source of isolation and anger, had begun to unravel threads of pain, allowing space for reflection and perhaps, in time, reconciliation. The conductor moved silently through the train, his ageless presence a constant undercurrent to the passengers' evolving journeys. Clad in his vintage uniform, with eyes shifting like smoke, he paused between carriages, the lantern light casting flickering shadows across his enigmatic face. His voice, when he spoke, was low and resonant, carrying the weight of timeless wisdom and subtle admonition. Every story has an end, yet every end is but a beginning, he intoned, his gaze sweeping across the passengers gathered nearby. The roads you did not take remain open, not as chains, but as possibilities. Carry these truths with you, for the journey beyond this train is yours alone to write. The words hung in the air, a cryptic blessing that both comforted and challenged those who heard them. As the train slowed, the familiar outline of the rail yard emerged through the gathering shadows. The station, though worn and abandoned, shimmered with a renewed significance. A place not just of departure, but of arrival into changed lives. Passengers gathered their belongings, their faces a mixture of nostalgia and hopeful anticipation. Leela, the young passenger whose innocence had inspired many, caught Evelyn's eye, and in that brief meeting was an unspoken promise, shared understanding of the courage it takes to step forward into an uncertain future. Evelyn rose, her movements deliberate yet light, the burden she had carried now transformed into a quiet strength. As she stepped onto the platform, the cool evening air embraced her, carrying with it the scent of earth and distant rain. Around her, the murmur of other voices blended with the gentle whistle of the wind, a chorus of lives forever altered by the journey aboard the Fable engine. Marcus followed, his usual guarded demeanor softened by the journey's revelations. He glanced once more at the train, a faint smile touching his lips, a gesture of farewell and gratitude. Clara and Jonas stood nearby, their expressions reflecting the complex emotions of endings and beginnings intertwined. The conductor lingered a moment longer, his figure blending into the shadows as he watched the passengers disperse. His eyes, shifting like smoke, held a glimmer of something beyond mortal understanding, an eternal witness to the endless stories of regret, hope, and redemption that passed through this mystical train. As the last of the passengers stepped away, the Fable engine lay silent once more, its ancient wheels poised to carry new souls toward their own confrontations with the roads not taken. The journey was complete for now, but the echoes of its stories would ripple outward, touching lives beyond the confines of the train. Evelyn took a final breath of the cool night air, feeling the weight of her past lift gently from her shoulders. Ahead lay uncertain paths, but, for the first time in many years, she was ready to walk them with courage and hope. The train's whistle sounded softly in the distance, a farewell and a beckoning, as the first stars began to emerge in the deepening sky. The Fable engine was ready for the next journey, and the endless dance of regret and renewal continued, carried on the rails of time and memory. The platform was drenched in the amber glow of the setting sun, the light casting long, fluid shadows across the worn cobblestones as the last passengers of the Fable engine stepped down. Evelyn Hart moved with a deliberate grace, her footsteps steady despite the lingering tremors of the journey she had endured. The cool air kissed her face, carrying with it the faint scent of iron rails and distant earth, a reminder of the liminal space she was leaving behind. Beneath her arm, her journal fluttered gently in the breeze, the edges worn and pages thick with the ink of confessions, memories, and reflections. Her eyes, once clouded with the heavy fog of guilt, now held a quiet clarity, a fragile peace that had taken root through the stories she had lived and heard within the train's timeless carriages. Each regret had been transformed, each shadow cast into a narrative thread that wove her past into something both bearable and meaningful. Behind her, the train's aged metal gleamed faintly beneath the flickering station lights, the polished brass of its fittings glowing warmly against the cool twilight. The soft hiss of steam whispered through the air, a breath of life from an engine that was more than mere machinery, a vessel of transformation, a bridge between what was and what might have been. Marcus Wren lingered near the open carriage door, his usual restless energy tempered by an unfamiliar stillness. His tousled blonde hair caught the light, the sharp angles of his jaw softened by a contemplative expression. No longer the sarcastic cynic who masked pain with humor, Marcus's gaze was more open, tracing the faces around him with a newfound empathy. The distant murmur of the station, punctuated by the occasional call of a conductor and the shuffle of feet, formed a gentle symphony that seemed to echo the tentative hope stirring within him. He glanced toward Evelyn, noting the way her hands clutched her journal tightly, the same journal he had once seen her write in with such quiet intensity. There was a kinship there, two souls shaped by regret, yet reaching toward the light of acceptance. Clara Lynn sat on a nearby bench, her delicate features illuminated by the soft glow of a street lamp. Her small sketchbook was open on her lap, a slender pencil dancing across the page as she captured the interplay of light and shadow on the platform. The lines she drew were tentative yet purposeful, much like the choices she now contemplated after the journey, the delicate balance between ambition and family, the crossroads that had shaped her own path. Jonas Gray stood a short distance away, his tall frame relaxed in a way that was almost foreign to him. The perpetual frown that had once marked his features softened into a look of cautious optimism. He exchanged a brief, meaningful glance with Clara, a silent acknowledgement of the shared journey they had undertaken, a journey that had forced him to confront the shadows of his past and glimpse the possibility of healing. Farah, the train's calm and reassuring attendant, moved quietly among the passengers, offering small smiles and gentle nods. Her presence was a steadying force amid the swirl of emotions, a reminder that even in moments of profound change, there was grace to be found in simple acts of kindness. Leela, the young passenger who had come to symbolize the hope for second chances, skipped lightly along the platform. Her bright eyes sparkled with innocence and unspoken promise, a living testament to the enduring possibility of renewal even in the face of hardship. The conductor lingered in the shadows near the train's entrance, his ageless figure framed by the dim light. His eyes, shifting and smoky, held the weight of countless stories of regrets confronted, of choices relived and reframed. Though his expression was inscrutable, there was a subtle nod as he watched the passengers move forward, each carrying the invisible scars and newfound strengths of their passage through the realms of parallel time. Evelyn paused at the edge of the platform, inhaling deeply the crisp evening air. She felt the ghost of her old guilt, the heavy burden of the daughter she had left behind, but it no longer chained her. Instead, it had transformed into a soft ache, a bittersweet reminder of what had been and what might still be. She unfolded the worn pages of her journal and whispered a quiet vow to herself, a promise to seek out the fractured ties and mend them with patience and courage. The journey on the Fable engine had given her more than just stories. It had given her a map to navigate the roads not taken, and the strength to walk them anew. Marcus approached, his voice low but steady. "You ready to face what's next?" She looked up, meeting his gaze with a faint smile. "I think I have to be." Together with Clara and Jonas, they moved away from the train, stepping into the transforming shadows of the station. The air was thick with possibility, the familiar surroundings subtly altered by the ghosts of their journey and the hope that now infused their steps. The Fable engine sat waiting behind them, a silent sentinel poised for its next voyage. The rhythmic chug of its engine pulsed softly, echoing the heartbeat of stories yet to be told, regrets yet to be faced, and lives yet to be transformed. As the group disappeared into the night, the conductor's eyes gleamed one final time, a spectral promise that the cycle of journeys, of redemption and renewal, would continue beyond the shadows, into the luminous unknown. And so, the passengers of the Fable engine embarked on new beginnings, the weight of their regrets lightened by the power of storytelling, acceptance, and the fragile but enduring hope that comes from embracing the roads not taken. The station fell into silence, the fading echoes of footsteps mingling with the distant whistle of the departing train, leaving behind a world forever changed by the stories it had carried. But the stories themselves, the echoes of regret, the whispers of forgiveness, the shimmering threads of alternate lives, lingered on, woven into the fabric of time, waiting for the next traveler to step aboard and face the profound mystery of what might have been. The journey was far from over. It was only just beginning. The carriage was hushed, save for the soft scratching of Evelyn Hart's pen upon the worn pages of her journal. Outside, rain whispered against the glass a gentle percussion that blurred the world into an impressionist painting of greys and muted blues. The Fable engine had slowed, its once surreal glow now dimmed to a humble twilight. Evelyn's thoughts wandered, tracing the labyrinth of stories she had witnessed and lived, each a thread woven into the tapestry of this enigmatic journey. She paused, inhaling deeply, the scent of aged wood and faint traces of coal smoke mingling with the damp air. Her silver-streaked hair caught the carriage's muted lamplight, and her thoughtful eyes reflected the weight of the regrets she had carried aboard this train. But beneath that weight stirred something softer, tentative hope, fragile yet enduring. Closing her journal with deliberate care, Evelyn allowed herself a brief smile. The stories she had gathered, the lives she had glimpsed her own included, were no longer shackles, but keys. Keys to understanding, to forgiveness, and to the possibility of renewal. She sensed the quiet presence of the conductor nearby, his eyes shifting like smoke in the dim corridor beyond the door. His role as arbiter of fate and regret had been both a challenge and a gift, guiding each passenger through the shadows of what might have been. Elsewhere in the train, Marcus Wren leaned casually against a polished wooden wall, his usual sardonic grin softened by something new. The restless cynicism that once shielded him had cracked, revealing glimpses of vulnerability. He watched Clara Lynn as she sat nearby, her delicate features illuminated by the flicker of candlelight. The gentle scratch of her pencil on paper punctuated the stillness, capturing moments of grace and quiet strength. Marcus found himself drawn not only to her sketches, but to the solace they represented as shared, understanding that even in regret there was connection. Jonas Gray, tall and brooding, stood by a window, his reflection fractured by the dancing flame of a small candle. The bitterness that had hardened him throughout the journey was melting into something far more complex. Memories of his lost sibling surfaced unbidden, each one a poignant ache that now seemed tempered by acceptance. He closed his eyes, releasing the ghosts that had haunted him, and for the first time in years allowed a fragile peace to settle within. Old Man Weaver, the train's venerable storyteller, lingered in the background, his twinkling eyes surveying the passengers with quiet satisfaction. His tales woven from sorrow and hope had mirrored the passengers' own journeys, blurring the lines between fiction and truth. Now, as the train approached the forgotten rail yard where it had first appeared, his voice softened, and he let the stories rest for a time. The conductor emerged briefly from the shadows, his vintage uniform immaculate despite the agelessness that cloaked him. His gaze swept over the passengers, a faint smile touching his lips. The smoke-like flicker in his eyes dimmed, signaling the end of his stewardship for this voyage. The train's surreal ambience ebbed, replaced by the familiar sounds of a waking world, the distant call of a crow, the rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. As the train slowed to a final halt, the passengers gathered their belongings, their expressions a mixture of contemplation and quiet resolve. Evelyn glanced around at the faces she had come to know so intimately Marcus. Clara Jonasson saw, reflected in them, the same bittersweet nostalgia and contemplative hope she felt within herself. One by one, they stepped onto the platform, the night air cool against their skin. The station, once a forgotten relic, now seemed charged with possibility. The journey aboard the Fable engine had ended, but the stories it had awakened would continue to ripple through their lives. Evelyn took a final breath, clutching her journal close. "This is not the end," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "It is merely the beginning of a new story." The conductor faded into the shadows of the train, his figure dissolving like mist at dawn. The Fable engine stood silently, awaiting the next passengers burdened with regrets, ready to transform sorrow into understanding once more. Outside, the rain ceased, and a single star pierced the darkened sky, a beacon for those who dared to confront the roads not taken. The aftermath of their journey was not marked by grand gestures or sudden revelations, but by the subtle shifts within each passenger. Evelyn found herself revisiting memories of her daughter, not with the sharp sting of guilt, but with a gentle clarity that allowed forgiveness to take root. Her journal, once a repository of pain, had become a testament to growth and hope. Marcus, once cloaked in cynicism, began tentative steps toward embracing vulnerability. The humor that had masked his pain softened into honest smiles, and the possibility of rebuilding fractured relationships glimmered on his horizon. His conversations with Clara, imbued with newfound openness, hinted at a future shaped not by regret but by choice. Clara herself embraced a renewed sense of purpose. The sketches in her notebook reflected not only what might have been, but what could still be, a delicate balance between ambition and family, loss and love. Her quiet strength inspired those around her, a reminder that healing often came through connection. Jonas, too, found himself at a crossroads. The shadows of his past no longer held dominion over his present, and his guarded nature began to soften. His journey had taught him that acceptance was not forgetting, but a courageous step toward peace. As the station lights flickered and the first hints of dawn painted the sky, the passengers parted ways, each carrying within them the echoes of the Fable engine's stories. The train itself sat silent, a vessel of transformation waiting patiently for the next chapter, the next journey, the next soul-seeking reconciliation with the roads not taken. And as the world around them stirred awake, the passengers knew, deep within, that the power of storytelling, the weaving of past regrets into tales of redemption, would continue to bind them, even as their paths diverged. The journey was over, but the story, as always, was just beginning. The echoes of regret clung to the air like a soft, persistent hum, gentle yet insistent, threading through the lives of those who had stepped off the Fable engine. The train's ancient wheels had stopped turning, its doors sealed for now. But the journey lingered like a whispered secret carried on the breeze, a silent melody that played softly beneath everyday moments. Evelyn Hart sat quietly in her small apartment, the world outside muted beneath the steady drizzle of rain. The room was bathed in the pale glow of a single lamp, its light pooling over an open journal resting on the worn wooden table. Her fingers traced the familiar lines of ink she had scrawled hours earlier, each word a fragile bridge to the memories she had wrestled with aboard the train. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the scent of rain mingled with old paper and faint lavender from a candle left burning nearby. The memory of her daughter came unbidden, a fragile apparition shimmering in the half-light. The version of that child she had glimpsed in an alternate timeline, laughing, hopeful, and still whole. The vision was bittersweet pain, laced with the possibility of forgiveness that had seemed so distant before the journey. Evelyn's throat tightened, but a quiet warmth began to spread through her chest. She reached for her pen, her hands steady as she began to write again, this time with a gentler touch. Across town, Marcus Wren found himself standing at the window of a bustling cafe, the sounds of clinking cups and murmured conversations weaving around him like a familiar cloak. He watched people pass by, strangers with stories he would never know, lives intersecting and diverging in countless ways. His fingers curled nervously around a steaming cup of coffee, knuckles white with tentative resolve. The humor and sharp wit that had once served as his armor softened, replaced by a cautious openness. He thought of the faces he had avoided, the conversations left unfinished, and the love he had once pushed away. The lessons from the train, the courage to embrace vulnerability, the possibility of forgiveness settled in his mind like a fragile seed. Marcus exhaled slowly, the tension easing, and for the first time in years, he considered reaching out. In a sunlit corner of a small park, Clara Lynn sat on a bench, her delicate fingers moving gracefully as she sketched the outline of a blooming flower in her notebook. The afternoon light filtered through leaves, casting dappled shadows over the pages. Each stroke of graphite was deliberate, a meditation on growth and renewal. Clara's thoughts wandered to the crossroads she had faced, the choice between a promising, scientific career and the family life she had embraced. The train's journey had reframed her understanding, revealing that ambition and nurturing were not opposing forces but threads in the same tapestry. She closed her notebook gently, breathing in the crisp air, a sense of calm determination settling over her. The future no longer felt like a battle, but a canvas waiting to be painted with intention. Outside the train station, Jonas Gray leaned against a cold brick wall, arms crossed as he closed his eyes against the fading light. The perpetual frown that had marked his features softened, the weight of years easing from his shoulders. His mind replayed the bitter family secrets he had confronted aboard the train, the pain, the loss, the misunderstandings that had festered in silence. But now a tentative peace blossomed within him, fragile yet undeniable. The journey had not erased the past, but it had illuminated a path toward reconciliation and healing. As he exhaled, the tension in his body released like a held breath, finally free. Jonas opened his eyes to the twilight sky, a glimmer of hope reflected in their depths. The conductor's figure lingered in the background of their lives, a shadowy reminder of the realm between choice and consequence. His ageless eyes seemed to watch over them still, a silent guardian of stories yet to be told. The passengers carried the train's lessons in their hearts, the power of storytelling, to transform sorrow into understanding, the fluidity of time and identity, and the enduring human capacity for hope despite regret. Evelyn's journal had become more than a repository of memories. It was a testament to growth and forgiveness, a beacon for others who grappled with the roads not taken. Marcus's tentative steps toward openness hinted at new chapters waiting to be written. Clara's balanced resolve promised a harmony between dreams and reality. Jonas's softened demeanor spoke of healing's quiet strength. Though the Fable engine had come to rest, its journey was far from over. The echoes of regret continued to ripple through the lives it had touched, shaping choices, inspiring courage, and weaving a shared narrative of redemption. As dusk deepened into night, Evelyn looked out her window once more, the city lights flickering like distant stars. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the train awaited its next passengers, souls burdened by regret, yearning for a story to call their own. And she, along with the others, would carry the echoes of their journey, reminders that even in the shadows of what might have been, there was the enduring light of hope. The story was not finished. It was only beginning anew. The echoes of regret, soft and unyielding, whispered their presence in every quiet moment. A reminder that the lives we live are shaped as much by the dreams we let go as by those we chase. Evelyn closed her journal with a sigh that was both a release and an embrace. Tomorrow held uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, it also held promise. The morning light filtered softly through the cafe's tall windows, casting an amber glow over the polished wood and scattered papers on the table. Evelyn Hart sat quietly, her fingers tracing the rim of a warm cup of coffee, the steam rising in gentle spirals that seemed to carry away the remnants of restless nights. Across from her, Clara Lynn unfolded a small sketchbook, its edges worn but cherished, pages filled with delicate pencil strokes that captured fleeting moments of beauty and sorrow alike. They had met once before, briefly, aboard the Fable engine and encounter, wrapped in the surreal ambience of the train's timeless carriages. Now, in the tangible world beyond the rails, the weight of their shared experience pressed upon them with a new clarity. Their conversation began cautiously, words tentative as they navigated the fragile terrain of regret and hope. "I never thought I'd find someone who understood," Clara admitted, her voice a soft murmur beneath the cafe's hum. "That feeling of being caught between what was and what could have been." Evelyn nodded, eyes reflective. "The train showed me that regret isn't just a burden to carry, it's a story waiting to be told. And sometimes telling it is the first step toward letting go." Their dialogue wove between memories and revelations, each sharing glimpses of alternate timelines they had glimpsed aboard the train. Evelyn spoke of the bittersweet moments with her daughter in a life she had once abandoned. Clara revealed the quiet ache of a career path left unexplored for the sake of family. In these confessions, they found not only understanding, but also the fragile threads of connection that bind disparate lives together. Meanwhile, far from the warmth of the cafe, Marcus Wren stood beneath a slate-grey sky, raindrops falling softly onto the pavement around him. The city's noises blurred into a distant symphony, punctuated by the steady rhythm of his footsteps. His reflection fractured across shimmering puddles, each shard a glimpse of the man he was and the man he might yet become. The tension between fate and free will played out silently within him, a delicate dance of acceptance and resistance. Memories of his broken engagement surfaced like flickering shadows, each a reminder of choices made and paths forsaken. Yet beneath the cynicism lay a growing ember of possibility, tentative hope that vulnerability might not be a weakness, but a doorway to renewal. Jonas Gray, too, wrestled with his past in the solitude of a dim apartment. Rain traced erratic patterns down the window pane, mirroring the turmoil within. His gaze was fixed outward, but his mind journeyed inward, revisiting the bitter family secrets that had long cast a pall over his life. The bitterness had hardened him, but now moments of quiet acceptance began to stir, fragile as the morning light. Back at the station where the Fable engine had first appeared, the conductor lingered on the fog-shrouded platform. His vintage uniform bore the weight of countless journeys, his eyes shifting like smoke, both watching and becoming part of the mist. As the train's silhouette dissolved into the horizon, his presence hinted at the endless cycle of stories yet to unfold. The eternal interplay of choice, consequence, and the human heart's yearning for understanding. In the intertwining lives of these passengers, the profound truth of the Fable engine's journey revealed itself. That regret, while deeply personal, is also a shared human experience, a thread weaving together disparate fates in a tapestry of empathy and hope. As Evelyn and Clara's newfound friendship blossomed, as Marcus grappled with his inner conflict, and as Jonas edged toward peace, the echoes of their intertwined stories resonated beyond the trains, carriages reminding them all that the roads not taken are not merely paths of sorrow, but also avenues toward transformation. The chapter closed on a quiet note of anticipation, the lingering question of how these entwined destinies would continue to unfold. In the lives awaiting them beyond the train's enchanted journey, the Fable engine, ever enigmatic, waited patiently for its next passengers, its story an eternal testament to the power of confronting the past to illuminate the future. The carriage was bathed in the muted grey light of an overcast sky, the landscape outside shifting with the fluidity of a dream. Rain traced slow, meandering paths down the glass, each droplet a tiny voyage of its own, much like the lives tangled within the train's ancient frame. Evelyn Hart sat by the window, her fingers absently tracing the worn leather cover of her journal, the edges softened by years of use and countless stories penned within. Her eyes, thoughtful and distant, reflected the muted world outside a world that, like her own, was composed of countless possibilities, some realized, many left unexplored. Within the stillness, the rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels against the rails formed a hypnotic cadence, a steady heartbeat that seemed to pulse with the very essence of time itself. It was in this suspended moment that Evelyn felt the weight of the unseen paths, the roads not taken, the moments when a single choice might have spun her life into an entirely different shape. She thought of her daughter, the silent absence that had shadowed her for years, and the countless versions of herself that might have stayed, loved, and healed the fractured bond. Across the carriage, Marcus Wren leaned back in a worn leather chair, his usual restless energy tempered into a rare stillness. Beside him, Clara Lynn's delicate pencil moved across the pages of her sketchbook, capturing faint outlines of the ever-changing world beyond the windows. Their conversation hovered on the edge of vulnerability, words unspoken filling the spaces between them like the gentle swell of an approaching tide. "Do you ever wonder if any version of us is truly complete?" Marcus asked softly, voice stripped of its usual cynicism. Clara looked up, her eyes reflecting a quiet hope. "Maybe it's not about completeness," she said, "but about the courage to keep moving forward, imperfect as we are." Marcus smiled, a flicker of something fragile breaking through his usual charm. "Imperfect, huh? Sounds like my kind of redemption." In a nearby corner, Jonas Gray stood beneath the flickering glow of a lamp, shadows playing across his sharp features. His voice, low and steady, wove through the conversations like a challenge. "We speak of fate and choice as if they're separate, but maybe they're just two sides of the same coin, endless coin spinning through time." His words stirred a charged atmosphere, the passengers drawn into a delicate dance of skepticism and belief. The train, ancient yet alive with whispered secrets, seemed to pulse in response, its very being a testament to the fluidity of time and the malleability of identity. As the evening deepened, Old Man Weaver's voice rose in the dim light, weaving a surreal tale that mirrored the journeys of the passengers. His story blurred the lines between reality and fiction, a tapestry of sorrow and hope, stitched with threads of memory and imagination. The conductor, ever watchful, stood nearby, eyes shifting like smoke, embodying the relentless passage of time and the inevitability of confronting regret. Evelyn closed her journal, the faint scratch of the binding a gentle punctuation in the quiet. She felt the weight of countless unseen paths, not as a burden, but as a mosaic of growth and learning. The perfect choice was a myth. The true story lay in the messy, beautiful process of becoming. The train hummed onward through the veils of twilight, carrying its passengers not just through space, but through the labyrinth of their own souls. In the weaving of stories and shared confessions, they found a fragile but enduring hope of recognition that amidst the infinite possibilities, what mattered most was the courage to embrace their imperfect selves. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, and the world beyond the window seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The carriage was quiet, save for the gentle creak of aged wood and the soft whisper of the wind outside the window. Within this intimate space, Old Man Weaver sat alone, a figure woven deeply into the fabric of the Fable engine's enigmatic existence. His eyes, a deep-set pool of quiet wisdom, scanned the faces of the passengers who lingered nearby, their spirits heavy with the weight of memories and the unspoken desire for solace. The patchwork coat he wore stitched from fragments of countless tales rustled faintly as he leaned forward, his voice a soft murmur that seemed to ripple through the air. "Stories," he began, his tone coaxing like a lullaby, "are the threads that stitch the fabric of our souls. Each regret, each hope, each choice made or unmade becomes a strand in the tapestry of who we are. The Fable engine carries these threads, weaving them into something both fragile and eternal." Around him, the passengers listened, some with eyes closed, others tracing the contours of their own memories as his words painted vivid pictures of parallel lives and untaken roads. Evelyn Hart sat nearby, her journal resting on her lap. The inked pages a testament to the stories she had gathered on this journey, stories not just of others, but of herself. The weight of regret had lifted slightly from her shoulders, replaced by a contemplative warmth that settled deep within her chest. Later, after the train had slowed to a halt and the last echoes of its whistle faded into the evening air, Evelyn found herself lingering on the platform, hesitant to fully step away from the realm of the Fable engine. It was there she encountered Old Man Weaver once more, seated on a weathered bench beneath the flickering glow of a gas lamp. The air was cool, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and distant rain. He looked up as she approached, his eyes gleaming with a quiet recognition. "The journey does not end when the train stops, Evelyn," he said gently. "The stories we carry become part of us, shaping the paths we choose to walk beyond these rails." Evelyn nodded, the worn leather of her journal warm against her fingers. "I never realized how much a story could hold the sorrow, the hope, the endless possibilities." Old Man Weaver smiled, a gesture both tender and knowing. "It is in telling and hearing that we find understanding. Regret may shadow us, but stories light the way forward." Across the yard, the figure of the conductor emerged from the shadows, his vintage uniform crisp despite the passage of time, his eyes shifting like smoke. watched the passengers with a gaze that was neither threatening nor kind, but wholly inevitable. Evelyn's heart stirred with a mixture of unease and reverence, a reminder that the confrontation with one's past was a journey without end, a balance between acceptance and the desire for change. As the night deepened, Evelyn clutched her journal to her chest, feeling the cool breeze stir its pages. The stories she had encountered aboard the Fable engine were no longer distant echoes, but living parts of her own narrative, threads she would carry forward with hopeful resolve. In that moment, she understood that while the train's journey had ended, her own was only beginning, guided by the enduring power of storytelling to transform sorrow into understanding and regret into renewal. The platform lights flickered once more, shadows dancing alongside the fading echoes of the last tale told. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of sight, the train waited silent, patient, eternal, ready to welcome the next traveler burdened by regret, to weave their story into the boundless tapestry of time. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the city washed clean under a pale moon that cast a gentle glow through Evelyn Hart's apartment window. She sat alone at the small wooden table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold beside her, fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the phone. The device felt heavier than it ever had, weighted with years of silence and unspoken apology. Outside, the street was quiet, the usual hum of city life subdued in the late hour. Evelyn's breath caught as she dialed the number she had memorized long ago but had never dared to call. Each ring echoed in the stillness like a heartbeat, a fragile thread pulling her toward the daughter she had left behind. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady, layered with the bittersweet blend of regret and hope that had shadowed her since she first boarded the Fable engine. "Hello." The voice on the other end was tentative, cautious, a sound Evelyn had longed to hear, yet feared to face. "It's me, Evelyn. I know it's been a long time. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, and I'd love to talk when you're ready." The pause was almost unbearable, but then came a quiet breath and a small, hopeful reply. It was not a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, not from relief, but from the fragile courage that had brought her to this moment. Across town, in a small cafe where the windows were streaked with the remnants of an earlier drizzle, Marcus Wren sat hunched over a worn notebook. His fingers, usually restless and quick to deflect with humor, moved deliberately as he wrote. The words were raw, stripped of the cynicism he wore like armor. He wrote to an old friend, someone he had once pushed away in his fear of vulnerability. The letter was an admission, a tentative step toward forgiveness of others and himself. Outside, the neon lights flickered softly, casting a gritty noir glow on the rain-slick streets. Marcus's usual sharp jawline was softened by the shadows and by the weight of the emotions he was finally willing to face. He glanced up as a stray cat darted across the pavement, a small reminder that life, despite its wounds, continued to pulse with possibility. Not far away, Clara Lynn sat beneath the broad branches of a maple tree in the park, her sketchbook resting on her lap. The afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, dappling her delicate features with golden light. She moved her pencil gently across the page, capturing the flutter of a butterfly as it danced above the grass. The scene was simple, yet it held a profound symbolism of transformation and new beginnings that Clara had come to embrace during her journey on the Fable engine. She paused, a soft smile touching her lips as she watched a child nearby chase after the butterfly with unbridled joy. The innocence and hope in that moment mirrored the quiet acceptance growing inside her, a peace she had not known when she chose family over ambition, but one she now cherished deeply. On a deserted train platform on the outskirts of the city, Jonas Gray stood alone. The wind tugged at the collar of his coat, carrying with it the distant whistle of an approaching train. His usually furrowed brow was relaxed, his sharp eyes reflecting the twilight sky. For once, the bitterness that had shadowed him softened, replaced by a tentative calm that surprised even himself. He breathed in the cool air, allowing the weight of years to settle without resistance. The journey through the Fable engine had peeled back layers of guardedness, revealing the raw pain beneath, but also the possibility of peace. Jonas did not smile. That too was a guarded gesture, but there was a quiet dignity in his stance, a readiness to face whatever came next with less fear. Back in Evelyn's apartment, the phone call had ended, but its echoes lingered. She reached for her worn journal, the pages filled with stories and reflections gathered from the train and the passengers who had shared their journeys with her. Each entry was a thread in the tapestry of transformation, weaving sorrow into understanding, regret into hope. She wrote, "Tonight, I took the first step toward the daughter I left behind. The road is uncertain and the silence between us is vast, but the light is no longer extinguished. There is a lingering warmth, a fragile promise that perhaps the stories we tell ourselves can change the course of our lives." Marcus's letter was carefully folded and placed in an envelope, the seal a small act of faith. Clara's sketches would soon find a new home in an exhibit celebrating the delicate balance between sacrifice and fulfillment. Jonas, with his frown softened, would begin to reach out to the family he had long abandoned in his bitterness. The conductor, watching from a distance, cloaked in the shifting smoke of time, allowed himself a rare, enigmatic smile. The journey was far from over, but the passengers had crossed a threshold. The shadows of regret still lingered, but now they were pierced by a quiet, persistent light, the light of acceptance, renewal, and the enduring human capacity to hope. As the dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of rose and gold, the Fable engine waited patiently for its next journey. Its carriages held the echoes of stories told and lives transformed, a vessel not just of regret, but of redemption. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between past and future, the passengers moved forward, carrying within them the lingering light that would guide them through the days to come. The train's whistle sounded softly in the distance, a call to new beginnings, as the city awoke beneath the watercolor wash of early morning light. The cafe was a quiet refuge from the chill outside, its warm glow spilling gently onto the rain-slicked pavement. Within, a small gathering had formed around a worn wooden table, the air thick with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and old paper. Evelyn Hart sat among them, her silver-streaked hair catching the light as she held her journal open. Her voice steady yet tender as she read aloud passages carved from the depths of her recent journey. Her words wove through the room like a delicate thread, stitching together fragments of regret and redemption, loss and hope. The listeners some familiar faces from the train. Others curious strangers leaned in, captivated by the unvarnished honesty that bared the soul behind each story. The murmurs of agreement, the occasional soft sigh, and the scratch of pens taking notes created a quiet symphony of empathy. Marcus Wren found himself seated by the window, the rain casting a veil of shifting shadows across his features. His fingers trembled slightly as he recounted moments of vulnerability to an old friend. The memories that once felt like shackles, now loosened by shared understanding. Laughter mingled with tears, a fragile testament to his tentative openness. The rhythmic patter of raindrops became a soothing cadence, echoing the steady pulse of his slowly healing heart. Meanwhile, Clara Lynn had taken to a sun-dappled park. her sketchbook balanced on her knees as children's laughter wove round her like a gentle breeze. Her pencil danced across the pages, bringing to life scenes inspired by the intricate, intertwined stories of the Fable engine's passengers. Each line and shade captured not just faces and places, but the emotions that had surged through the trains, carriages, the pain, the hope, the quiet moments of connection. Her art was a silent hymn to the power of memory and shared experience. Jonas Gray stood alone on a bridge at dusk, the city's lights flickering to life beneath a velvet sky. His eyes traced the patterns of the river below, contemplating the reflections, both literal and figurative. The journey through alternate timelines had peeled back layers of bitterness, revealing new perspectives that unsettled yet intrigued him. The steady hum of the awakening city was a reminder that life, much like the river, moved forward despite the eddies of regret. Back in the cafe, Evelyn closed her journal, the final words lingering in the air like a benediction. She looked up to meet the eyes of those gathered, seeing in them a mirror of her own transformation. Her journal, once a private sanctuary of sorrow and hope, had become a shared artifact, a beacon for others navigating their own uncharted waters. Farah, the ever-present attendant from the train, now a gentle presence in this new setting, moved quietly among the group, offering warm smiles and steady support. Old Man Weaver, too, lingered nearby, his eyes twinkling with the quiet satisfaction of a storyteller whose tales had found fertile ground. The stories told and retold in this space transcended the boundaries of the train, reaching into the lives of those who had never set foot on the Fable engine. They became threads in a larger tapestry, binding strangers through the universal language of regret and redemption. This collective narrative wove a new kind of community, one built not on shared geography, but on the shared experience of confronting the roads not taken. Evelyn's journal, now circulated among friends and strangers alike, sparked conversations long overdue. People began to share their own stories, the act of narration becoming a balm for wounds old and new. The train's surreal journey had ended, but its effects rippled outward, transforming sorrow into understanding, isolation into connection. Marcus found himself reaching out more, his once guarded heart opening slowly to the possibility of forgiveness and love. Clara's sketches became a quiet testament to the beauty found in imperfection and choice. Jonas, though still solitary in many ways, began to entertain the thought that reconciliation might be within reach. As the days lengthened and the seasons shifted, the passengers carried their stories into the world, each narrative a small light against the encroaching darkness of regret. The conductor, that enigmatic figure, had once guided them through the liminal spaces of time and choice. Now, his presence was felt in the echoes of their shared stories, in the spaces between words and in the hearts of those who listened. The question lingered, unspoken yet profound. How could the stories we tell continue to bind us, to heal us, and to carry us forward long after the journey itself has ended? It was a question without a simple answer, but within the gathering warmth of that little cafe, surrounded by kindred spirits, the answer began to take shape through the enduring human capacity to find meaning, comfort, and hope in the stories we share. And so, as the night deepened and the last cup of coffee was sipped, the tales of the Fable engine passengers lived on, whispered, written, and remembered, binding them together in a tapestry of shared humanity and the timeless quest for redemption. The stories that bind us, after all, are never truly finished. They continue to unfold, chapter by chapter, in the lives of those willing to listen and to tell. And as Evelyn closed her journal one final time that evening, a quiet smile touched her lips, a promise that the journey, in its many forms, would always continue. "Would you like to hear another?" she asked softly, looking around the table, the familiar weight of hope settling deep within her chest, ready to carry her hand all who listened into whatever story lay ahead. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of Evelyn Hart's apartment, casting elongated shadows across the worn wooden floor. The air was still, held in a quiet suspension, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting. Evelyn sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped tightly around a phone that felt heavier in her grasp than it had in years. Her journal lay open beside her, the inked words of the journey still fresh and trembling on the pages, a testament to the stories she had lived and heard aboard the Fable engine. For years, Evelyn had held a silence thick with regret, a silence born from the chasm between her and her daughter, a gulf widened by absence and unspoken pain. But now, inspired by the unfolding of alternate timelines and the courage shed witnessed in others, that silence was breaking. She dialed the number she had memorized but never dared to call. The line rang out, a slow, steady pulse that echoed the pounding of her heart. Each ring stretched seconds into eternities. Then a voice, tentative, cautious, answered. "Hello," Evelyn's throat tightened. "It's me." The simple words carried the weight of years, a fragile bridge extending across the fractured space between them. What followed was a conversation, hesitant and halting, but filled with the tentative promise that had eluded her for so long. She spoke carefully, her voice a blend of apology and hope, listening as much as she spoke, allowing space for wounds to surface and begin their slow healing. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Wren sat alone in a quiet cafe, the muted hum of conversation a backdrop to his restless mind. A folded letter lay on the table before him, the paper creased from countless rehearsals of what he might say. The afternoon sun spilled golden light across the wooden surface, catching the edges of the words that might mend the silence between him and the woman he had once loved. He traced the ink with a fingertip, feeling the sting of vulnerability rise within him. The journey on the Fable engine had stripped away layers of cynicism, revealing a rawness he had long buried beneath humor and charm. Now, facing the blank page, Marcus grappled with the fear that forgiveness might be just out of reach, but also with the hope that reaching out was the first step toward something new. In another part of the city, Clara Lynn found herself seated on a bench in a bustling park, her sketchbook open on her lap. The vibrant colors of spring surrounded Hertha, blush of cherry blossoms, the fresh green of newly unfurled leaves, the lively chatter of children at play. She sketched quietly, capturing the movement and life around her with gentle strokes. Clara's heart was a quiet tempest of conflicting desires, ambition and family, dreams deferred and dreams embraced. The journey aboard the Fable engine had illuminated the paths she had chosen and those she had left behind. Now, drawing the world anew, she was learning to reconcile these parts of herself, finding peace in the delicate balance she was crafting. Not far from the park, Jonas Gray walked slowly along the fog-shrouded riverside path. The mist curled round the skeletal branches of trees, blurring the edges of the world. The river flowed dark and steady beside him, the steady murmur a reminder of time's unyielding passage. Jonas's mind turned over the weight of his past, the losses, the bitterness, the long-held grudges, but unlike before, his steps were less burdened, his gaze less hardened. The journey had forced him to face the uncomfortable truths he had buried, and though the process was painful, it had begun to loosen the shackles of resentment. As he paused to look out over the water, a faint, almost imperceptible easing softened his features, tentative acceptance of what was and what might yet be. Back in her apartment, Evelyn ended the call and sat back, a fragile smile touching her lips. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in years, the possibility of reconciliation felt real. Across the city, Marcus folded his letter carefully, resolve steadying his breath. Clara closed her sketchbook with a quiet sigh, a newfound clarity settling over her. Jonas continued his walk, each step lighter than the last. Their lives, once fragmented and adrift, were beginning to converge toward healing, each drawing strength from the shared journey and the stories they carried within. The Fable engine's echoes lingered still, a reminder that even the deepest regrets could give rise to hope, and that the roads not taken might yet find their way back into the light. As evening fell, the city lights flickered on, casting a warm glow through rain-speckled windows. Evelyn's thoughts drifted to the future, to conversations yet to be had, and to the quiet courage it took to open a heart long closed. She reached for her journal once more, the pen poised to capture this new chapter not of what was lost, but of what might be reclaimed. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the faint whistle of the Fable engine echoed a promise, a call, an invitation for those still searching for their own paths to be rejoined. The journey was far from over. The platform lay drenched in the muted glow of a late afternoon sky, streaked with violet and gold, as if the heavens themselves had been touched by the surreal magic that clung to the air. The Fable engine, resplendent in its antique grandeur, stood silently, its polished brass gleaming faintly in the shifting light, the soft hiss of steam whispering promises of departure yet to come. Evelyn Hart, arms wrapped loosely around her worn journal, stood with Marcus, Wren, Clara Lynn, and Jonas Greyfor, souls irrevocably altered by the journey that had brought them here. Their breaths mingled with the cool air, a quiet communion of shared experience and unspoken understanding. Evelyn's eyes traced the intricate carvings on the train's wooden panels, each detail a testament to the craftsmanship of another era, a vessel not merely of iron and steam, but of memory and transformation. She felt the weight of all the stories that had unfolded within these carriages, the laughter, the tears, the whispered confessions of regret and hope intertwining like the rails beneath them. Beside her, Marcus shifted restlessly, his usual charm tempered by a vulnerability she had come to recognize as genuine. The sharp jawline softened in the dim light, and for a moment, the barriers he had so carefully constructed seemed to crumble. Clara, ever gentle, held her small sketchbook to her chest, her delicate fingers tracing invisible lines as if sketching the contours of the moment itself. Jonas stood a little apart, his usual frown softened to a thoughtful crease, the burden of his past losses tempered by the tentative peace he now carried. The group was silent, each lost in their own reflections, yet bound by the invisible threads of the journey, the roads not taken, the choices made and unmade, the stories that had shaped them. Then, like a shadow emerging from the mist, the conductor appeared. His vintage uniform was impeccable, the fabric catching the fading light as if woven from time itself. His eyes, those shifting orbs, like smoke caught in a breeze, regarded the group with a knowing smile, enigmatic, comforting, and somehow eternal. "The journey continues," he said softly, his voice both distant and immediate, a paradox embodied. "For every passenger who departs, another will arrive. The Fable engine never rests, for regret is a river that flows endlessly." Evelyn met his gaze, a silent exchange passing between them, recognition of the profound truth beneath his words. She tightened her grip on the journal, feeling the pulse of the stories within, the catharsis and hope distilled from sorrow and longing. Marcus's smile was small but genuine, a fragile bloom of optimism in the twilight. Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the promise of new beginnings sketching delicate futures. Jonas exhaled slowly, the weight of his past lessened, his frown giving way to a quiet resolve. The conductor stepped back, tipping his hat as the train's wheels began their rhythmic clatter against the rails. The sound echoed through the station, a heartbeat of iron and steam that spoke of journeys beyond the physical, of time folded and unfolded, of lives intersecting across infinite possibilities. The landscape outside blurred, colors bleeding into one another as the train gathered speed, slipping between realms known and unknown. Evelyn's gaze lingered on the departing Fable engine, the silhouette of the conductor standing sentinel at the rear, a timeless guide for those yet to come. She felt the bittersweet ache of farewell mingled with the spark of renewal, the knowledge that this was not an end, but a continuation and invitation to embrace the present with courage and grace. As the last echoes of the train's whistle faded into the vastness, the 4 passengers remained on the platform, their hearts lighter, their spirits knit together by the stories they now carried. Evelyn opened her journal, pen poised to capture the final lines of a chapter that would forever shape her understanding of regret, redemption, and the transformative power of storytelling. "The roads not taken are never truly lost," she wrote, "for in their telling we find the courage to walk new paths." And with that, the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the world in a gentle twilight that promised the dawn of new stories yet to be told. The Fable engine glided with a gentle steadiness, its aged wheels humming an ancient song beneath the soft cloak of twilight. Evelyn Hart sat near the window of the last carriage, the cool glass framing a world washed in watercolor hues, lavender fading into indigo, gold streaks melting into shadow. Her journal lay open on her lap, the worn leather cover creased from years of intimate use. Pen poised, she breathed deeply, the rhythmic cadence of the train's passage a soothing pulse that matched the irregular beat of her heart. For hours, she had resisted the urge to write, her fingers trembling with the weight of memories long buried but now unearthed by the journey. Yet, now, as the twilight deepened and the train whispered through the veils of time and possibility, she surrendered to the quiet call of the page. Words flowed like a river over smooth stones, carrying with them the bittersweet tapestry of regret, acceptance, and hope. "To regret is to love what was lost," she wrote, her script elegant yet tentative, "but to accept regret is to love oneself anew." In the stories we tell of what was, what might have been, and what still could be, we find not chains but wings. Her hand faltered for a moment, eyes misting as the memories of her daughter's laughter mingled with the ache of absence. Yet beneath that sorrow bloomed a fragile seed of peace, nurtured by the shared stories she had heard and lived alongside during the voyage. Across the carriage, the conductor stood quietly, a sentinel of the liminal space that the train inhabited. His ageless eyes, shifting like smoke, swept over the passengers with a gaze simultaneously distant and penetrating. The uniform he wore, though vintage and impeccable, bore no insignia save for the emblem of an hourglass entwined with an Ourobarissa, symbol of time's endless cycle and the eternal dance of choice and consequence. He was neither judge nor savior, but a guide, a mirror held up to the soul's reflection. His smile, subtle and knowing, suggested a profound understanding of the human condition, that to live is to err, too long, and ultimately to reconcile with the paths we did not take. In the softly lit lounge car, a rare calm had settled over a small cluster of passengers. Evelyn, Marcus, Clara, and Jonas shared a quiet moment, their faces bathed in the amber glow of antique lamps. The fatigue of emotional battles, fought in countless parallel lives, softened into a gentle camaraderie. Marcus's usual restless energy had quieted, his sharp blonde hair tousled, less by inner turmoil and more by a newfound ease. "It's strange," Marcus murmured, breaking the silence. "How it feels like we're all carrying pieces of each other's stories now, like I'm less alone in my regrets somehow." Clara nodded, fingers lightly tracing the edges of her ever-present sketchbook. "Storytelling is a kind of healing. When we share, we transform pain into understanding." Jonas, whose perpetual frown had softened over the course of the journey, offered a rare, tentative smile. "Maybe this train isn't about changing the past, but learning to live with it." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant, haunting whistle of the Fable engine, a long, low note that echoed through the night air, carrying with it the weight of endings and the promise of beginnings. Outside, shadows lengthened, and the landscape seemed to pulse with life and memory. Near the rear of the train, Old Man Weaver took his place once more, his wiry frame silhouetted against the flickering lantern light. His voice, rough yet melodic, wove a final tale that gathered the threads of the passengers' experiences into a tapestry of sorrow and hope. "In every life," he intoned, "there is a story of roads not taken, of love lost and found, of dreams deferred but not forgotten. The Fable engine does not erase regret. It reveals it, lays it bare in the light of understanding. For in stories, we find the courage to forgive, not just others, but ourselves." His words hung in the air like a prayer, the shadows around him flickering as if alive, blurring the lines between reality and imagination. The passengers listened, hearts swelling with a collective recognition of their shared humanity. As the train neared the forgotten rail yard where the journey had begun, Evelyn closed her journal gently, a sense of completion settling over her. She looked around at the faces of those who had become fellow travelers, not just on this train, but on the path toward acceptance. The conductor's figure appeared before her, eyes reflecting the soft glow of the carriage lamps. "The journey never truly ends," he said quietly. "Each story is a seed. What you nurture from here will bloom in ways unseen." Evelyn nodded, a quiet smile breaking through the veil of lingering sorrow. "Thank you for guiding us through the shadows." He inclined his head, a gesture both farewell and benediction. "Until the next time the Fable engine calls." As the train slowed to a halt, the doors whispered open to the cool night, and the passengers began to step onto the platform change, not by erasing their regrets, but by embracing them as part of the intricate mosaic of their lives. Evelyn's final journal entry lingered in the air like a whispered promise. "In the stories we carry, the roads we did not take, there is life yet to be lived. Acceptance is not the end of longing, but the beginning of freedom. And in freedom we find renewal." The Fable engine stood silent once more, a timeless vessel resting between worlds, ready to carry the next burdened soul toward their own story of sorrow, understanding, and hope.